Hello everyone, and welcome to the third edition Climate Change and Sustainability webinar hosted by UBIC Webinars. My name is Latka Roris, and I will be the moderator today. For the third time this year, we are meeting to discuss climate change and learn about sustainable projects from all over the world. In this edition, we will listen to 6 speakers from countries such as Norway, US, Kenya, Tanzania, and Pakistan. We will learn about airborne wind energy produced from kites high up in the air, and also nanotechnology as the energy for the future. We will hear about reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, about wildlife species conservation in Eastern Africa, about restoration and protection of coral reefs, and also about one of the world's largest reforestation program, 10 Billion Tree Tsunami program in Pakistan. Prepare yourself for approximately 3 hours of amazing presentations. Before introducing the agenda and speakers, I would like to offer you, dear participants, a possible cooperation with UBIC Webinars. Does your organization want to make a professional webinar to create new business partnerships, find new clients, or just discuss important topics? Do not hesitate and contact us on operations@ubicwebinars.com, and we will make an amazing webinar for you. Let's go now over the agenda and housekeeping rules. In the meantime, I would like to launch one poll for our Zoom participants, so please answer those questions. The first speaker today is Thomas Harklau, who is the CEO in Kitemill, and he will speak about airborne wind energy. After that, Mrs. Christina Ender from Conservation International will show us the natural climate solutions in Africa. The third speaker, Noah Sitati, is also based in Africa in World Wildlife Fund and will speak about the role of large-scale landscape approach in mitigating climate change. After that, you will hear about the 10 Billion Tree Tsunami program in Pakistan by Mr. Hassan Ali Sukera. Mr. Arman Koitz, who is the founder of Nanom, will explain how to use nanotechnology to address climate change. And the last presentation by Mr. Todd Barber from Reef Ball Foundation will be dedicated to coral reefs and their restoration. I hope you will stay with us until the end, as we will have some short time for additional questions and answers from the audience. When it comes to housekeeping rules, if you will have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the Q&A box in your Zoom control panel. For our YouTube and Facebook participants, you can write your questions to the live chat. If you would like to speak about us on social media, please do not forget to use the hashtag #UBICWebinars. Now we can go through the results of our short survey. Great, so we can see that our participants are mainly from Asia, then from Europe, also from Africa and North America. And what are the most interesting topics when it comes to environmental topic? We can see that it's global warming, renewable energy, also water pollution, food waste and recycling as well. Great, thank you for answering these questions. And now is the time to introduce our first speaker, who is Thomas Harklau from Kitemill. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the company. He has a degree in electrical engineering, and in 2007, he successfully founded the company Vosvind. 1 year later, in 2008, he founded Kitemill, and also until 2019, Thomas served as a member of the board in Vos Energy, a Norwegian energy utility building hydropower capacity. Thank you very much, Thomas, for being with us today, and we are looking forward to your presentation. So please, you can start with your presentation.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing the presentation. No, thank you for the introduction. I'm really happy to be here today and have the opportunity to tell you about how airborne wind can change the energy mix. So there will be a poll also during this presentation, so it would be excellent if you can help us with answering this one. So let's dive into it. Airborne wind. To reach the zero emission society in 2050, airborne wind can deliver 350 gigawatt of annual installed capacity. Yeah. And to give you a figure of how big that number is, it would be something like 100,000 plants a year of an average capacity of 3.5 megawatt. The cumulative capacity would then be able to supply about 28% of the global electricity mix. So, and the result of that again would be to abate about 10 gigaton of CO2 compared to today's emission of 51 gigaton annually. So how we are doing this, we fly the kite crosswind, like the tip of the wind turbine blades. It's sweeping a large area as it's conducting a work on the tether. It's pulling out the tether from a ground-based generator, a winch. So the electricity is produced on the ground. The kite flies in a helical pattern 90% of the time, pulling out this tether from the ground-based generator. 10% of the time, it's in retraction mode. It's pulled back before it's entering into new production phase. It's a high efficiency rate. Start and landing is happening with propellers, so it can take off from the ground already when it's zero wind at the ground and reach up to better wind resources higher up. So to give you an impression of how this looks like, we can show you the pilot plant we're currently operating. And you can see here the takeoff with propellers. It only uses 30 seconds up to 1 minute to reach its operational altitude at 300 meters, and for this scale, where it enters into crosswind flights. So the crosswind flights could be done in figure 8 or in circles. Mainly we are doing circles, as you can see here. You can also see that the kite operating at this altitude would be would have very low visibility. It has a low visual impact as it's flying high up. So landing again happening with propellers, and we can pull it back. The landing and takeoff will happen maybe in average once every second day. Most of the time, the kites will be in operation. So what we are doing is to line up the forces in a much smarter way. So we are handling the same power as a conventional wind turbine with less than 10% of the material. This is also what allows us to reach higher up and find stronger and more stable wind resources in the altitudes above where the current wind turbines are operating today near the surface. So reaching these wind resources means that we will have higher availability. We have better wind resources and can produce more hours a year. Compared to solar, we expect to produce about 3 times as much energy per installed capacity. And compared to conventional wind, almost half, of course, depending on the location, almost twice, sorry. So, and also cutting out 90% of the material means that we will be much more efficient in all parts of the value chain, and we can reduce the investment cost. And reduced investment cost in combination with increased production yield will, of course, give a very beneficial levelized cost of energy when you compare mature technologies. The technology will not be mature in the beginning, but what we see is that the barrier to come to grid parity will be much smaller than what we have seen in any other introduction of energy production technologies in the history. And during this period of the maturing, we can also benefit from other value propositions. The first one being the mobility. When we only operates 10% of the material, it means that there is less cost tied up to the installation on site and to the logistics. This means that we can actually relocate the plants during its lifetime without ruining its business case. And think about that, when we are going to transit to the net zero society, there is huge changes that need to be undertaken. And there is a lot of waiting time to get the permits, to get new transmission lines, and to install new permanent capacity, 5 to 15 years, depending on the scale of the project. And Airborne Wind can help us to install renewable energy capacity in the meantime helping us to reach the objectives despite of the implementation time. Another key advantage is that we open up larger areas, new geographical markets for financially viable wind power. And the reason for that is, of course, that we open up totally new wind resources that was not available before. So during the maturing phase, we are looking into the following market segments. Of course, the weak grid off-grid market, being a more mobile solution, means that we can meet the customers that are benefited only by diesel today. So, and this is a really huge market potential, and there is a big need for renewable solutions for this segment. Also, we see two utility scale niches. It might be more, but the first one we have seen is that if you can replace the offshore wind turbines when they are coming into decommissioning after 20, 25 years of operation, no late 2020, the foundation is no longer certified for the loads of the large wind turbines. But if you remove the wind turbine but keep the foundation, we might be able to extend the lifespan of this with another period, costing about 2 million euro to remove each of these foundation. The operators are seeing a lot of avoided costs by finding another use for these foundations. Further, we see that already see that conventional wind turbine OEMs are offering hybrid solutions now. They offer the customer's ability to extend the use of their area, their site, and using airborne wind to reach higher and better wind resources might increase production on the same site, and especially during low wind periods where the energy prices tends to peak. And so this is interesting, and also the fact that then we could share capacity and now share the infrastructure would mean that we would have a more viable business case, and we can also launch a higher volume of airborne wind systems earlier in the maturing phase, helping to mature the technology faster. So the picture on the right side here, that's the offshore wind park in Horns Rev, Denmark. It's the first large-scale park going into decommissioning. It consists of 80 wind turbines. And then, of course, if you're going to put out 80 airborne wind systems here, you would expect these systems to produce something like 5 to 10 million operational hours during its lifespan. And to be able to make this decision, we would need to have a substantial amount of operational hours before that decision is being made. And this is why we are building up a pipeline of smaller projects that will allow us to qualify the technology for these kind of projects. Then there is a disadvantage of having a high number of early scale plants with a rather immature technology distributed. So we are also looking into the ability to find one site or a few sites that can accommodate a high number of plants, so we can launch the technology and mature it in an easier way. And instead of finding business cases, we will work with a financial framework to make this viable. And we strongly believe that this is the most efficient way for the society to enable airborne wind energy. It will be possible to do it much faster than if we go for smaller distributed projects. So the airborne wind industry is now on the verge of a breakthrough. We have a high number, or decent number of commercial companies that are strongly backed up by academia. There is a lot of good research behind airborne wind at this moment. Also, the big actors like EU is stepping in. EU made a study of airborne wind back in 2018 that already have led to airborne wind being specifically mentioned in calls, and other calls have been adapted to also accommodate airborne wind energy. That's a very good development. Further, there has been an excellent cooperation between the airborne wind companies through Airborne Wind Europe, which have led to airborne wind being taken up as a specific work task in the International Energy Agency. And this is lifting airborne wind up to an international level how it's supposed to be. This happened in 2020, And now this year, 2021, we see that the US Congress is asking NREL to make a similar study about airborne wind, a study that we have been supporting earlier this year. So all of this is good indications that we are on the right way. This picture shows a snapshot of the airborne wind history from we founded Kitemill until today. The companies on the right side here is companies working with ground-based generators like Kitemill. And what we see is that there is a trend for technology choices to move up this ladder to the concept choice that was made by Kitemill earlier. Further, we see also good indication of a consolidation in the industry, which makes sense because we need all the resources we can get, and we all need to make the airborne wind systems work. So it makes sense to gather the resources and centralize the development. Further, there is also a very good cooperation between the airborne wind companies. Beyond this, of course, through Airborne Wind Europe and all the industry-specific challenges, but also now on commercial projects where we work together as several companies on specific projects and the framework of these. So a lot of good things happening. One constraint for airborne wind is the access to sites to develop and mature the technology. Kitemill is very fortunate. We have maybe the best test site in the world, having an area of 3 × 5 kilometer, 1 kilometer altitude, where we can fly and develop the technology. We have the permit to operate one system and already secured the permit to extend this to another 4 systems. This is in close proximity to our workshop area, where we have developed over time an excellent capacity to validate and develop the technology. So we are currently expanding our operational envelope. It seems like in this picture we are flying in rain. We are not actually doing that yet, but we are flying in between the rain clouds, and we are having a system that is more and more tolerant from different conditions. We are not yet flying in clouds, but sometimes during this year, we might be able to fly in non-visual conditions, depending on how we proceed with the development. We are not flying constantly, so we are still ad hoc testing, but our flights are getting longer, and we already track positive energy production. Though performance is not the main target yet, we are still working on functionality. It will be much easier to tune the performance once we have plants in continuous operation. So at this moment, we are focusing on the functionality. A really big hassle also for airborne wind so far has been navigation. We are working with a system operating in very high velocity with very strong forces. And I think most of the airborne wind companies are struggling with this, to have a proper navigation system and to be able to exactly locate the kite where it's operate. And as you can see from our plots now, we are doing very fine. We have compassed this challenge. And I think the lowest plots are is actually from last week. We are pushing the barriers for every single test we are doing. Kitemill is testing every second week at the moment. This is the only wind measurement device that can measure wind up to 1,000 meter altitude. It's owned by DTU, and it's currently operated by Marcus Deal here as part of his PhD in a project called LIKE, a EU-funded project of how to use these devices for different applications. So we are very fortunate to have this capacity at Lista, and we hope to have it for quite some time in the future. We are developing through several technology platforms. Each platform is planned to serve a specific purpose. The first one, the one you have seen so far, is the KM1 model. This one is meant to extend operational experience, and it's as small as possible, but still relevant to operate continuous over time. So this is the type of challenges we are focusing on now, how to extend automatic operation to automate more of the processes. And we have already started also the work on developing the next model, the KM2, which will be the first commercial model. It's very suitable for the weak grid, off-grid market, and also be the model that we will mature the technology in a wider extent. The KM3 model following after there will be a model that can operate at grid parity. And we believe we can scale up the technology further beyond this 500 kilowatt. The KM4 model is meant to become a mainstream wind energy system, while a KM5 model in the 3 megawatt scale will be a leader within wind power. So what you're seeing here is that airborne wind doesn't need to be at the same capacity as conventional wind to score at the same metrics. And I also strongly emphasize that the commercial company shouldn't validate or prove the scalability of the technology in this phase, as that's proven very difficult for a commercial company. But instead, we're focusing on the nearer models. And here is a study made by BVG Associates based on the 350 kilowatt average cycle power, where they look into geodata of wind resources around the world and assess the levelized cost of energy this device could reach in a mature state. And it's difficult to, of course, say something about exactly what's beneficial levelized cost of energy, but that's why they also did a deeper study where they put in a lot of exclusion layers. They used policies, they used wind data from other energy sources, and they have shown us that the KM3 model can become the most cost-efficient energy production systems in a really large part of the world. This is an onshore study. We also believe that technology is viable offshore, but maybe not in the KM3 scale so much. So, and then bring me out to the last point I want to address, and that's the space efficiency. As conventional wind turbines is spread over a two-dimensional area, meaning that the wind that are facing the first turbines will be blocked and prevented to reach the coming turbines, the wake effect. This defines what distance you have to put between the conventional wind turbines. The airborne wind turbines will operate in a three-dimensional volume. This means that you can arrange the production and you will reach a much larger airspace. And we believe that this means that you can put the plants much denser, closer to each other, and by that you can achieve a higher power density. There has been some studies on this, supporting this, and from a practical perspective, we believe that you could reach something like 15-20 megawatt each square kilometer, where conventional wind turbine might only be around 5 megawatt each square kilometer. So that brings me to the end, and I want you to take along a few key factors. And the first one is that we are here talking about energy production technology that are suitable for a large-scale deployment, and it can make a huge impact on the CO2 emission. We believe this technology can remove 20% of the annual CO2 emissions today in 2050 scenario. Further, it's an energy technology that is very material effective, only consuming 10% of the material of a conventional wind turbine onshore. In fact, for an offshore wind turbine, we believe we only need about 2% of the material, removing 98%. That's an offshore floating structure. Makes this a very material efficient technology. Of course, the large impact will require an unprecedented large industry deployment, and but this will also be the case for conventional wind turbine, and I believe that this material efficiency will make this more viable, even if we today have a less mature or not mature technology at all. So it's worth the effort to make this happen. And the next point is the intermittency. Having a capacity factor of 60% in a mature case will not only give a good business case, but it will also mean that we need less storage. We will need less alternative energy transmitting cases like hydrogen and so the total cost for the society will fall further than only the individual business case for airborne wind. And then, of course, like I mentioned in the last slide, we will be space efficient. To install the volume I was talking on in the first slide, we need to occupy an area on the site of Northern Ireland every year. So that's going to be a big hassle. Let's hope that a major part of this will happen offshore, but still I think that airborne wind will have a very good case by its high space efficiency. So that's everything I had for you today, and I would be very happy if you could follow Kitemill and Airborne Wind further. Please visit our webpage, follow us on LinkedIn, and also follow Airborne Wind Europe and our competitors. Thank you very much for your attention.
Great, thank you very much, Thomas, for amazing presentation and to explaining us what does it mean, the airborne wind energy. So we have some questions from the audience, but before we could share the results of our poll, of the first poll, the question was, have you already heard about airborne wind energy? So we can see that majority, 71%, never heard about this energy before. So I hope that now we will know more. And we have also another question for you, for our Zoom participants. So just a second. And then we can answer the questions from audience. Okay, so there is another question. Do you believe airborne wind energy can become an important part of the future energy systems? So please answer, and then we will share the results. Let's wait for a few more seconds. But I think that it's very clear, and people think that yes, airborne wind energy becomes an important part of the future energy systems. Great, thank you for the answers. And now we have some questions from the audience. I could see that they were discussing the safety of these of this wind energy, airborne wind energy. So perhaps you could explain us more about this. Marl is saying that wind turbines are already associated with avian deaths. How does this application compare with wind turbines in terms of risk for avian deaths?
Yeah, shall I answer now?
Yes.
Yes, for the first question, it's about safety. There has been an excellent development now with the Aviation Authority International, the European Aviation Safety and Association have implemented new rules for unmanned aviation, which also include airborne wind energy. So this work is perfectly in line with what we have exercised in Norway with the Civil Aviation Authority here for the past years. And it's a very good way to deal with this safety. We are not allowed to do an operation which is not approved by the Civil Aviation Authority, and we gradually increase our scope of aviation, which will ensure the safety of people on the ground and other non-participating air traffic. So this is heading in the right direction. When it comes to the birds, and so we are doing assessment on that. We are located in one of the best bird sites in Norway. And we, of course, we are doing studies on this, Still, this is an early phase of technology introduction, so we need more operational experience, and we need to continue with this type of studies. I think we published our study, so you can read about it. There is nothing showing that this is a big issue, big problem in the present moment. It seems like it works quite fine together. Of course, like with all infrastructure, we shouldn't put this in places where you have threatened species and where the impact could be unbearable. But no red flag at this one at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We have another question from Eda. Does the kite fly 24/7 to generate airborne wind energy? I believe that you also answered, but perhaps you can say it again.
Yeah, that's it's going to fly 24/7. So the first model we have now will fly 5 hours a day, 5 days a week in the beginning, but the commercial product will fly 24/7.
Mm-hmm. Great. And do you know when this commercial product will be ready?
It depends on a few factors, but we are aiming for a commercial introduction already late next year. But it comes down to a number of factors. Among those, of course, financing for the next stage. Mm-hmm. But I believe during the next 2-3 years, you will start to see more commercial products from several airborne wind companies.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. There is also a question how this technology is applicable in developing countries such as Ethiopia.
Yeah, I think it can solve a lot of the problems there. We have some very good feature I presented to you just now. Then this is very challenging markets, so we are considering if this is the right place to start. But I believe that this could be a really big part of the solution.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And what kind of regulation does this system need to operate in the airspace?
Yeah, so like I mentioned in the first question, this is an unmanned aerial vehicle. So we are facing an area where these kind of vehicles will be quite normal, and the frameworks from doing that has already been established or are under this establishment, and we are part of shaping that. So we are spending a lot of resources on making sure that this kind of regulation comes in place.
Mm-hmm. Also, a question from Olusegun: how intensive is in terms of cost and expertise to maintain this innovation?
Yeah, that's a good question. And when we're talking about this big, large scale deployment, it's important to keep in mind that it's not only to produce some systems and put it out there. We have to build competence. We have to educate people in the whole value chain. This is why there is a barrier to introduce new technologies, and this is also why new technologies need to be lifted not only on commercial fact, but also by incentives and support, especially if we want the fast deployment that we need to reach the net zero society in 2050. So education will be important, but of course, on the other hand, we have to work on making the OEM quite achievable on a local basis. That's another fact of this, and I think that's possible.
Mm-hmm. Can you imagine that the world will run on renewable energy one day?
I believe so. But we have to take action, and it will not happen by itself. So there is some tough choices that have to be made.
Mm-hmm. And what are the biggest challenges and disadvantages of, pros and cons when it comes to airborne wind energy?
I think we have to remember we don't introduce new production technologies in this scale very often, maybe 3 times for the past 100 years. And I think it's difficult to grasp what big change and big impact we will get from it. So So the biggest challenge so far has been to source resources, especially funding to accelerate as fast as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that answered the question. Or was it one
great.
more maybe?
Yes, the time is actually over, so we should move on now to the second speaker. But thank you very much again for the presentation and also for your answers. And yes, I hope you will stay with us also until the end of the webinar, and we will have some additional space for questions and answers. So thank you again.
Excellent.
And now it's the time to introduce our second speaker. So our second speaker is Christina Ender. Christina, she is based in Nairobi, Kenya, and in her role as the Regional Climate Change Director for the Africa Field Division, she is in charge of coordinating and driving Conservation International's climate change activities across the African continent. Christina has more than 9 years experience in the climate change space with a focus on natural climate solutions, specifically REDD+. With her background in the carbon world, she has worked at the interface of climate finance, climate policy, and delivery of emissions reduction and removals. Originally German, she was brought up in West Africa and the UK and has lived in Kenya for over 9 years. Christina holds a master in biodiversity, conservation and management from the University of Oxford. Thank you very much, Christina, for being with us today, and we are looking forward to your presentation now. So please, you can start to share your screen.
Great, excellent. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Great.
Perfect. And just checking, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, but we can see also your notes. So you should change the view.
I'll use end the show. No, that's still the same. Okay.
Yes, so you should go. Yes, now it's okay.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Vlatka, for the opportunity for me to share my work on in Africa, specifically in Kenya, on natural climate solutions. So maybe just to give the audience an overview of how I will be taking you through the presentation, I have put together this slide. I will explain what natural climate solutions are and why they are important for addressing our global climate crisis. Then the second part will be an explanation on the concept of REDD+. Might not be that familiar with this term, and also describing an overview of what elements are required at the national scale to make this operational. I will then, the third part of the presentation will give you a quick insight onto the forest carbon projects, the REDD+ projects that have established over the last 10 or so years, specifically with a specific example of the Chulu Hills REDD+ project here in Kenya, the Conservation International established. And then finally, I will give an overview or insight into what has changed given the new policy environment that is now in place, and what needs to happen to align these site-scale activities with the national system. So with this, let's turn our attention to natural climate solutions. So we are all aware that the world made a historic decision to jointly combat climate change when signing onto the Paris Agreement. Global temperature rise to 2 degrees with the ambition to limiting it to 1.5 degrees to pre-industrial levels. So in order to achieve that, emissions need to be reduced in all sectors. So that includes the energy sector, transport sector, waste sector, etc., but also very much the land sector, which is what we are focusing on at CI. So in order to, with this, whilst the land sector has been somewhat overlooked, and in the last couple of years, it has emerged that nature is actually an incredibly important, if not the most important solution that we have readily at hand and available to achieving our climate goal. So, so to speak, it is an extremely efficient technology that we can implement to reducing or mitigating climate change. And so this slide shows that there's been a number of studies over the last few years that highlight that nature actually has the potential by 2030 to mitigate up to 10 gigatons of emissions a year, which is over 30%, actually 37% of the necessary mitigation that we need for a net zero pathway. However, it's noteworthy to say that despite this huge potential, nature has been undervalued in the past and underrepresented in global climate action. And it has historically received as little as 3% of the climate finance. So you can see that there is a big mismatch, a big gap between what we could achieve by really leveraging this nature as a natural climate solution and the funding that has been so far channeled into this. So this brings me to the definition of what natural climate solutions are. And this is a definition by Griscom et al. And he describes it as conservation, restoration, and improved land management actions that increase carbon storage and or reduce greenhouse gas emissions across global forests, wetlands, grasslands, and agricultural lands. So it includes all activities in all different that we know. So in his paper, there's various pathways or activities that one can take. And really it includes it ranges from the protection and conservation of threatened forests that are threatened by deforestation, or from deforestation to sustainable forest management, as well as to active reforestation and afforestation, which many of us know of very well. So it is really, what's important to note here is also that we need to tackle this from both ways, both ends. So if we want to achieve our climate goals, we need to reduce further emissions. So having emission reductions, as well as removing carbon from the atmosphere by sequestering it through afforestation, reforestation. So with this, let's take a turn to REDD+, which is one of the key and natural climate solutions that we have available. And so, as I mentioned, first of all, I give a quick overview of the origins of REDD, and that it emerged during the UNFCCC climate negotiations and as a concept in 2005, with the aim to mitigating climate change by reducing net carbon emissions in developing countries. The plus was added a few years later to include 3 more activities, and that is to recognize the sustainable forest management, enhancing forest carbon stocks, and conservation of forest carbon stock. So the aim of this is to drive conservation efforts to areas that are of risk of deforestation, and if this risk is mitigated, reward this through financial means. So one can generate carbon credits. So just as a summary, REDD+ includes 5 activities, as I mentioned, reducing emission from deforestation, and you can see here highlighted in red where that acronym comes from, reducing emissions from forest degradation, and then the additional 3 activities that incorporate the plus, the conservation, sustainable forest management, and enhancement of forest carbon stock. And in short, again, just to remind, it is an alternative financing mechanism for standing forests and the protection of important ecosystems. Very briefly, for a country to become REDD+ ready, which is the terminology we use, it needs to include and provide 4 Warsaw elements, and that was decided in Warsaw during one of the UNFCCC climate change conferences. So for that, the 4 elements include a country needs to have a national REDD+ strategy or action plan. It needs to have a forest reference level, which is the baseline that it will then record its progress against. It needs to have a safeguard information system and a national forest monitoring system. So very clear ways of how it will be measuring its progress. So, and conceptually, again, REDD+ is being carried out or being implemented or seen in 3 phases. As I mentioned, the first is the readiness phase, which is the 4 elements I described in the slide before. And then there is the implementation phase. So actually needing to implement activities that will reduce deforestation. And then in the 3rd phase, it's a way to have the results-based payments, the results from your activities. And there's finance to support all of these different phases. So briefly, these are 2 of the key main multilateral platforms that can support countries in developing and implementing REDD+. We have the UN REDD program that is currently supporting probably 65 partner countries across the globe, across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And then the World Bank Forest Carbon Partnership Facility is another one, which is currently supporting Kenya in its readiness work. So that is the idea on the national level. And in the meantime, however, as the government and countries are developing on these readiness elements, we've seen the emergence of voluntary REDD+ projects over the last decade. And so these are operating outside of a regulated system, and they are generating emissions reductions and removals, so REDD+ credits from their site activity, from the site scale, and transacting them on the voluntary carbon market. So any big organization who would like to purchase the credit can directly access those through the various projects that are currently operating. So they have various standards and their own methodologies for measuring the progress and accounting. For a project to be certified, it needs to go through an auditing process, and there are independent registries for the different carbon credits that are generated in these different projects. As I mentioned, these projects are generating significant emission reductions and removal, and they actually have been a great proof for this concept, and are receiving finance that will then flow back to the communities and to protecting this ecosystem more. And that is actually one of the key points that also is unique in the land sector, that through various standards and means, there are important community and biodiversity co-benefits that can be implemented through a REDD+ project. So the CCB standard, the Climate, Community and Biodiversity Standard, is one of those that project can choose to meet, and therefore have an additional certification outlining its abidance or how it is implementing the safeguards of a project. So a quick overview, just to show the different forest carbon projects that we currently have across the globe. So there's quite a few. But now let's turn our view to Kenya. And Kenya has a number of REDD+ projects. So we have reduced emission and deforestation from a REDD+ project, from reducing deforestation and degradation, such as the Chulo Hills on the top left and the Kasigao project on the top right, as well as afforestation projects in the bottom corners that are planting trees, and as well as rehabilitating mangroves on the coast. So with this, I will now dive into the third part of the presentation and give a quick overview of the Chulu Hills Red Plus project that the Conservation International has also helped to establish and support over the last few years. So to locate it, the project is located in southeastern Kenya, across the border from Tanzania. So we are actually, the project is very close to Mount Kilimanjaro, and it spans across 410,000 hectares. So it is fairly large, and it encompasses different ecosystems types. There's a cloud forest, the hills, that are really unique in this arid and semi-arid area and really important, as well as lowland savanna, shrub and grassland, especially on the western side of the hills. You can see it is also located between the Amboseli National Park and Tsavo National Park. And that is actually one of the key attributes to the area. So the Chulu Hills is an important, the hills, as I mentioned, you can see the tree in the bottom left, right. That picture was taken on top of the hills. It is a dense cloud forest, and it is actually acting as an important water tower, as we call it here in Kenya, a water catchment for the communities that live in the immediate surroundings, as well as those that live downstream. It's actually supplying water to this Kenya's second largest city, Mombasa. Then it also, as I said, it is located to to national parks, and it is as an important wildlife corridor for iconic species such as elephants and giraffes and lion, etc. It is important grazing land for the Maasai communities. So especially in the lowlands that herd the cattle and livestock on that land. It has endangered species. There is a small population of rhinos, and it also has some cultural significance. So there is some definitely some cultural practices that happen in the forest. And then finally, of course, it is an important carbon sink which helps to generate the local climate and the global climate. So what is important to note here is that this area has been threatened from deforestation, from encroachment, from farming, from fire, from charcoal collection, and activities are being implemented to mitigate this. And by doing so, the project can then verify credits and then sell these onto the voluntary carbon market to channel the finance back into the project, to supporting these activities, the conservation, but also very much supporting the communities through health and education projects, employment, etc. So this is just a quick overview again of a snapshot of the key elements. So in the project area, in the broader project area, there are about 140,000 people living there. What is unique about this project is that it is actually made up of it's totally Kenyan owned. It is made up of 9 partners that have come together to form a trust. And they include 4 indigenous communities, so 4 Maasai Group Ranch, 3 local NGOs, and 2 government agencies. And as I said, CI has been supporting this just as an outside advisor in helping to establish it. This project is validated and verified under the VCS, one of the standards, as well as the CCB. So in order to do that, we had to prove and go through, of course, all of the safeguards that need to be met, including free, prior, and informed consent from the communities, and making sure that everyone is fully included and aware of what this project is about, as well as receive all the benefits that come from selling the credits. So, however, and that brings me to the last part of the presentation, there is some changes in the air and there is need for alignment. And that kind of brings, the last part brings the international level
Christina, can you hear me? There are some problems with the connection, so let's wait for a while if it will be better. If not, we will move to another presentation. Okay, I think the connection of Christina was not very good. So unfortunately, she just left, but hopefully she will be back and she will continue. But I think that now we can move on and we can introduce the next speaker. So our next speaker is Mr. Noah Sitati. Mr. Noah Sitati has over 20 years of experience in community conservation in southern Kenya and northern and southern Tanzania, working with international conservation NGOs, namely WWF Kenya and AWF as a program manager, a research associate with Darrell Institute of Conservation and Ecology, and the CEO for Masai Mara Wildlife Conservancies Association. Professor Sitati was a senior lecturer at Moi University, Kenya, Tourism Department. He has taught and supervised master's and PhD students and has 57 publications in the field of tourism and natural resources. Thank you very much, Noah, for accepting the invitation to speak at this webinar, and you can start now with your presentation.
Thank you very much. Let me see what I can share. Can you see my presentation now?
Yes, we can see. Just go to the full screen, please. Great, we can see it now.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you for the introduction, and I'm going to talk about a program that we are undertaking, trying to take a different approach to conservation, and that is what we call a large-scale landscape approach as a strategy to mitigate human wildlife coexistence, and especially due to climate change. A case of East Africa, but I'll focus more on the Kenya and Tanzania side. We are talking about southern Kenya and northern Tanzania, which is a critical wildlife ecosystem, as you can see, with really massive wildebeest and zebras that crisscross between the two countries due to variations in resources, especially, of course, pasture, water, and so on, and driven by rainfall. So that is the importance of having the transboundary collaboration to ensure that this continued natural movement of wildlife, continues to move from one country to another country. I remember quite recently when our president of Tanzania visited Kenya, she said wildlife goes to Kenya to get pregnant and they come back to deliver in Tanzania. So that was really a very remarkable sort of experience that she shared with the Kenyan president to show the importance of having this transboundary collaboration. I want to say that climate change is real, and I know everybody knows that because it devastates humanity, natural resources, ecosystems, biodiversity, and so on. And I'm glad that my presentation is coming just after Christina, because Christina has touched quite a lot on the ecosystems that we also work within this southern Kenya, northern Tanzania. And you could see a number of climate change related challenges. In particular, of course, the impact is much greater outside protected areas where the communities live adjacent to these protected areas. And of course, with increasing human activities, increasing human population and the pressure, there is a huge threat to the existing biodiversity, especially wildlife that moves from one protected area to another protected area. So as such, this year, 2021, has been regarded as a year that we must really focus on climate change, and a lot of things, a lot of seminars and a lot of policy interventions have been taking place to ensure that climate change is given due consideration across the globe by the high-ranking political class. So building on the progress that we have already made over the many years, this is a time that we must now walk the talk and really come in and support climate change mitigation and adaptation to truly turn things around so that we'll be able to see the impact. And I would say that this webinar is therefore very, very timely, because it's one way of also sharing information. And I'm sure out of this, I'll be able to program myself or program the landscape that we are dealing in based on the lessons that I will have learned from Thomas and of course from Christina and other speakers that are going to listen to their presentations. So we need powerful voices to speak for nature. I think there's nobody else who can speak for nature. Nature cannot speak. We need this voice, and we are the voice that we must come up and really, we need convincing facts, figures, because there are people who don't believe that there is really climate change happening. So we must prove that it is happening and it's very devastating on biodiversity and the natural systems as well as human systems. So as WWF global mission is to turn this crisis by 2030 to ensure that where people and wildlife thrive, there's harmony. And that's what we are looking at. And of course, it's very complex because of these diverse threats. We've just seen from the previous presenter about the predictions in terms of climate change, where, of course, we've been talking about 1.5 degrees Celsius, what will happen at this increase in temperature. And now we are talking about increasing temperature to about 2 degrees centigrade. So very briefly, in terms of species, we see that at 1.5 degrees centigrade, we are likely to see an increase by 100%, flood risk. But when it goes to 2 degrees, we have 170% increase in flood risk. When floods happen, they have a huge implication on wildlife because wildlife cannot, most of it cannot stay in water. It will die, and most of the areas are submerged. That means there's no more food for grazing animals and so on. So that's how it affects wildlife species, where this presentation is all about. And of course, people will also adversely be affected. And now they're talking about 2 billion people being affected at 2 degrees centigrade, while about 700 million people at 1.5. So you can see really a huge increase in the number of people being affected. And when they're affected, of course, the sequence of the results chain is very clear. That there is a huge implication on biodiversity, on natural resources, and species at large. So that's how we possibly need to look at the best strategies on how to combat this so that people are not affected and the impact on species or biodiversity in general is not as much. In terms of species, they talk about 6% of insects, 8% of plants, and 4% of vertebrates. But then it will increase to 18% of insects. That's a huge increase. 16% of plants are affected and 8% of, almost double, because of climate change, increase in temperature. So just giving those few examples and looking at the leopard is projected by that by 2070, we may not have any habitat for the snow leopard anymore. And that means we are going to lose almost all the key wildlife species that we have in our ecosystem. Now, there is evidence of climate change in East Africa. And of course, what we have seen over the years include frequent and prolonged droughts. Initially, some years back, drought period was clear. We'll know that after 10 years, we'll have drought in Kenya. In Tanzania, we knew we'll have drought after 12 years. But these days, they have become very frequent, 4 years, 3 years, sometimes even some areas experience yearly droughts, which are very devastating. And when they happen, of course, there isn't enough water, there isn't enough pasture for livestock as well as for wildlife. And as you saw, this landscape is actually full of wildlife. Over 60% of the wildlife is outside protected areas on community land. So that would bring in really huge competition for the limited resources as we continue. Some areas, of course, also experience floods, low-lying areas especially, and these have also had huge impact on the wildlife as well as on the people, their crops, and so on. When crops are affected, then there's a high pressure on natural resources to be able to make a living. Charcoal burning will come in, and unsustainable exploitation of natural resources to be able to make a living because the livelihood has been dearly affected. We also have some experience of increasing temperature over the many years. You will see the Mara, the Serengeti ecosystem has shown like 1% increase in temperature over the many years. Wildfires are also very frequent. We recently had huge fires on Mount Kilimanjaro. There are fires in Savos and many other places. And of course, what happens thereafter is loss of pasture for wildlife. They get confused, they go into human inhabited areas, serious conflict, and of course, not mentioning some of the biodiversity that we don't see, the insects and snakes and snails, and a lot of them are devastated by wildfires. But our focus has always been on large mammals, elephants, and the big antelopes, but we don't really see what is happening on the other smaller animals. So landscape approach is increasingly becoming a more popular approach because of this migratory nature of the wildlife species that we have seen for their resilience and increased survival. That is very important. Initially, when we started programs, we were focused just in a smaller area around Masai Mara. But over time, then we have seen the importance of actually scaling up because the animals in the Mara will move all the way to Savo, to Amboseli, and some will get into Savo, some will get into Tanzania, at different parts of the transboundary areas. And that's what sort of drove us towards having the landscape approach. Now, just a good example of climate change in our vicinity, Mount Kilimanjaro is a classic example where when you look at the ice cap, 1912 and 2000, there is a huge decrease by 82%. It's almost gone. That when you fly over Mount Kilimanjaro, it's almost bare. The ice cap is almost all gone. And there's been a huge implication when you look at what has happened in that ecosystem. You'll see most of the elephants are now going to higher parts of the mountain where they never used to be because it's much, warmer now, and there's, better food and so on. So they're actually encroaching, getting into biomes that they never used to reach. And then these ice caps supply water in some of the wetlands on the Kenyan side in the Amboseli ecosystem. And some of these wetlands are actually drying up. Many of them have dried up. And as a result of that, we are seeing increasing human-wildlife conflicts. This used to be the dry grazing areas in the Amboseli because it's much drier. But now with the wetlands getting dried up as a result of the reduced ice cap to sort of, fill up these wetlands. So we are seeing serious human-wildlife conflict, especially elephants. And when that happens, the local people will, of course, retaliate and sort of attack the wildlife. They kill the wildlife because of conflict. So the mortality rate of elephants in the Amboseli ecosystem has been the highest compared to poaching, pressure because of scarcity of water and increasing competition for water with the livestock and the people within the area. What we have also seen over the years is increasing human-human conflicts. And these are pastoralists with with crop farmers who are doing irrigation. And they have actually converted most of the river channels into supplying water for irrigation. And we find that the pastoralists downstream have no adequate water for livestock. And this has also caused some serious conflict among the people who are living in this ecosystem. The water table has really gone down, and people trying to dig wells, dams in the ecosystem must now invest a little bit more because the water level has gone lower and lower, and the existing wells have actually dried up. Many of them now, when you drive through this ecosystem, you see abandoned farms because the wells have dried. After 3-4 years, there's no water anymore because of what has happened on the Kilimanjaro as a result of climate change. And as a result of this, there is a high wildlife mortality and livestock as well. I remember in 2009, we lost like over 60% of the wildlife and livestock, populations within the Amboseli ecosystem as well as the Mara ecosystem because of drought. So there is that huge, impact with the communities, especially being the Maasai who are pastoralists in nature, keeping huge herds of livestock, and whenever drought sets in, they actually end up losing lots of wildlife. Now, Kilimanjaro, of course, is key, the tallest mountain in Africa, and we've experienced several dry spells that have had serious implications on mortality of wildlife and livestock. And it also comes with increased diseases that also affect wildlife, like anthrax. Many elephants will die, rhinos will die as a result of anthrax because there's no grass. And when they feed on the bare ground, and that's when they get exposed for anthrax, and many of them have died. In Amboseli, I remember we lost over 500 during this time, and that's quite a huge population of elephants dying, as a result of drought. I've just talked about retaliatory killings, elephants with spears, arrow wounds, and so on. It's very, very common. Some are poisoned by putting, poison in watermelons, fruits, and so on, and they get poisoned and they die of. And because of scarcity of water, people are now guarding water at night, because elephants, when they come in, they drink a lot of water, about 150 liters of water every day. So when they come in, the local people have to guard their water so that livestock have sufficient water the following day. And that has become also a huge problem within this particular landscape. El Nino in 1998, well, it's massive flooding and massive wildlife deaths happened across the landscape. And now we've been having these cross-border movements of the Maasai communities from Kenya to Tanzania and vice versa, because it's one community. Now it's no longer happening because of the changes that have taken place. On the Kenyan side, there's massive conversion of land from community land to private land and fencing. There's a lot of land sales that have happened, and serious fences have come up, electric fences. That means the Maasai herding areas have now diminished over the years. And of course, sometimes they will sell their livestock and they have nowhere to graze their livestock because the land has it's been sold to people from Nairobi or other parts of the country who are not of that from that community, and these are farming tribes or communities that are coming. So that has been a huge implication, and quite recently, when the president or the former president of Tanzania stopped livestock from moving across the border, that has had a huge implication because the survival of Maasai livestock dependent on moving between the two countries. When it's so dry on the Kenyan side, they'll bring livestock on the Tanzanian side and vice versa. Now, that sort of strict cross-border policy, it's not a policy really, it was just a pronouncement, really made the Maasais to suffer in terms of accessing enough water as well as pasture. As a result of this, there's been a shift in their culture from pastoralism to agro-pastoralism. Many of them are now converting their land into some sort of farming because their livestock is not enough to provide food. Initially, it was a taboo to cultivate or to cut trees and convert grass into some sort of, maize field and so on. But now that has weaned off, and many Maasai communities are doing some cultivation or inviting people from out to assist with the cultivation. So what is this SOCNO that we are talking about? The southern Kenya, northern Tanzania. This is the geoscope of the bigger landscape approach that we have taken, where of course it encompasses Masai Mara ecosystem, right from the Mau Forest, which is the biggest water tower in Kenya that supplies water into the Mara River, goes through the two countries, getting into Serengeti. So these are the two protected areas in this sub-ecosystem, Masai Mara National Reserve and the bigger Serengeti National Park, which is 10 times bigger than the Masai Mara. And then in between, we have the West Kilimanjaro sub-ecosystem and the Amboseli ecosystem. In Amboseli, we have the smaller Amboseli National Park. This area is much dry, it's dusty and sandy. Most of the trees have actually dried off. And then here we have the famous Kilimanjaro National Park. The animals will move from the Amboseli ecosystem into Kilimanjaro through some community wildlife management areas. In Tanzania side, they're called wildlife management areas. Here we have Endrimet that has a critical corridor here called Kitenden Corridor that allows elephants during the dry season to move from the much dry Amboseli ecosystem into the Kilimanjaro. And when it gets very wet, they'll move down back to the Amboseli. So you can see how important these corridors are. And that's the essence of SOCNOT, to maintain connectivity. In Swahili, we say unganisha. Unganisha is to join. So we are trying to join these two countries through the already established sort of natural corridors to allow the wildlife to continue. But over the years, some recent publications show that over 60% of the corridors have actually disappeared. And it means very few corridors exist. And even this one that I'm just pointing out is almost gone. This massive human expansion, cultivation that are happening. And now we are out to see if we can be able to secure this corridor. So, and we look at the last one, the last sub-ecosystem, we have Mkomazi National Park, we have rhinos, we have elephants. We've had over the recent past an increase of elephant population in here from 70 the last 7-10 years to 1,200 according to the last year's census. So massive increase. But when you look at the areas, remain static. People are pushing, through cultivation, settlements, and so on. It is one area that we have experienced a really serious human-wildlife conflict, especially elephants, over the last 2 years. And the government has been very concerned. And now we've come up with a national human-wildlife conflict mitigation strategy to see how these can be addressed in this ecosystem. And of course, plus others. And then on the Kenyan side, we have the Tsavo East National Park and Tsavo West National Park, which are critical. And then we have the Chulus, which Christina was talking about. where, of course, Red Plus project is being undertaken. And that's one of the projects that we think can work for the future. So this is about Sokonot. We have over 34 community conservation areas. All these are community conservation areas. They're called conservancies on the Kenyan side. On Tanzania side, they're called wildlife management areas. We have one here, we have Macau, we have Miatu. And then, of course, we have Lake Natron, which is a Ramsar site. Ramsar site is of global importance. Serengeti is a World Heritage Site. Kilimanjaro is a World Heritage Site. Amboseli is a biosphere, it's a biosphere reserve, and so on. So you can see all these are critical, biodiversity hotspot areas which are of global importance. So what is so special about Sokonot? It's a massive landscape that we have put together because we thought that is the best way to conserve the biodiversity. The area is a combined Switzerland and Austria, the size of those two countries. So you can see how big it is with, I think, about 10 protected areas, 32 conservation areas, number of reserves, and so on. And there's a massive biodiversity in terms of numbers and species richness with over 15,000 elephants. There are black rhinos. We have over 3,000 lions and packs of wild dogs and many other, 1.5 million wildebeest that migrate between the two countries. And there's a high tourism attraction in the area. I've just mentioned about the importance of these areas, and maybe I just forgot about being important bird areas, especially Lake Natron is the only breeding site for the flamingos. That's where they come to breed from, from the Kenyan side. And then Mao being the greatest complex water catchment on the Kenyan side. So over 60% of the wildlife is actually found outside protected areas. And these areas form very critical connectivity, between protected areas, but they're all human inhabited. And as wildlife disperse through these areas, there's serious conflicts and the corridors are diminishing because of agricultural expansion, human settlements, fencing. There are a lot of fencing, especially on the Kenyan side. Tanzania, there are no fences so far. There's massive degradation of the landscapes and habitat loss is happening, and all these are threatening the movement and survival of wildlife in this greater landscape. I talked about the drought that we've had, we lost a lot of wildlife, and this has a huge implication on tourism because the kind of tourists that we get are what we call wildlife-based tourists. So they come to see the big fight, elephants, rhinos, the lions, and so on. And when they come in, they bring in, tourism earnings, resources, they boost the businesses for local community, and therefore it improves both local and national economies. But this rapid expansion of non-conservation friendly land uses that are happening, conflict, we're having bushmeat is also becoming a huge problem, especially in Serengeti. The massive, snares have been collected in Amboseli. It's a huge program because people are using those to catch the small antelopes, but then sometimes the bigger animals would also become victims, and like elephants, we've seen many of them either being caught the trunks, and then they cannot feed, and they just die as a result of starvation. So Sokonot as a program is trying to address all those many challenges that I've just discussed, including policies that conflict between the two countries to see if they can be harmonized to ensure that there's really proper conservation and management of wildlife across the border. And we are lucky that we have East African community that's also coming up with a number of policy and strategies that will help to ensure that cross-border conservation is addressed. Rangeland management is key, is one of the areas of our approach, and of course, nature-based enterprises. And now we are talking about nature-based solutions to address climate change. So we took this approach of landscape because of increasing donor interest. over the years, we've now seen a lot of interest from donors and really some good funding coming in, because the regional programs are highly preferred, especially with the transboundary. There's serious business potential in these areas, both tourism, livestock. Areas are very good in agriculture. Red Plus project and non-timber forest project in this area. Christina just talked about the Chulu and then Kazigao areas where they're successful in terms of Red Plus, and those are places that we also want to try and see whether they could now generate a bit of more income. We are now talking about beyond tourism because we've seen what has happened to the communities that have been highly dependent on tourism because of COVID-19, zero income to the communities, wildlife management areas. And now we are thinking about other products like Red Plus, non-timber forest products, and many others to ensure that the livelihood of the communities is not really affected adversely. There are a lot of regional agreements that we are basing on to help us to improve our management across the borders. These areas have global biodiversity importance, flagship species like elephants and rhinos. And of course, the communities here are Maasais. There's a lot of donor interest and indigenous communities who are seen as marginalized. And the convention of the migratory species that ensures connectivity makes this area the perfect area for conservation, and more lastly, is being a transfrontier conservation area, just like any other that have been identified in Africa for donor support, especially by the EU. Now, just to give a snapshot of an example of migration by wildebeest, we've seen an increasing wildebeest population from 1956, that's about 2020. The population is increasing at 1.1 to 1.5 million wildebeests over the years. But when you focus on the Mara ecosystem, you'll see a drop in the number of tourists, in the number of wildebeest from 1975 to 2015. You see a massive drop. What is happening on the Mara side is very devastating. Most of the area has been turned into cultivation, and most of the land has been fenced off. And therefore, animals cannot move as they used to move, as we see. This is a classic example, the map you can see on this side, Serengeti side, this is a Mara. The Mara is so small, but then there's more wildlife outside the Mara. All these areas used to be like a breeding, area for wildebeest. They'll come all the way from Serengeti, pass through Masai Mara, go into these loiter plains, breed from there, and then they start coming back. By November, December, they have crossed the border. That is not happening now because the fences are all here, now very close to the park, meaning that these wildebeest cannot continue to go where they used to go to breed from. And that could explain why the drop in the wildebeest population. And of course, normally during the wet season, all the wildebeest have come down to Serengeti. So we have the resident population and we have the migratory population. The same happens in Amboseli, where of course the wildebeest will come into from the Tanzania side, Longido, Kilimanjaro side, into a smaller, you can see the gray part that is Amboseli National Park, and beyond. All these are now human inhabited areas. There's massive farming, the massive, fences have come up because people have come in from outside the ecosystem, bought land, and put them under, serious fences. So this affects mobility of wildlife. During dry season, they have nowhere to go where they used to go to access water. So they are confined in areas where, of course, food is limited, water is limited, and that is what is causing massive mortality of wildlife. Now we have a fence around here because of conflict by elephants coming into Kilimanjaro region, and this has cued elephant movement as well. So there's more elephants now coming to areas where they never used to go. and that has also caused a lot of conflict. Now, in the Mara ecosystem, looking at this as a Mara National Park, there is promotion of the areas adjacent into tourism, and all these are tourism lodges that have come in to benefit the landowners so that they leave their land for conservation. As I said, over 60% of the wildlife is outside protected areas. So most of these areas are now open, and those who have put up the fences are bringing them down. With support from the conservation NGOs in the Mara, we have our organization and other organizations. All these areas that have been put under serious fences are now being pulled down so that people can, benefit from conservation. The Mara itself, it generates about 43 million USD. That's an annual sort of earning. Just from the Masai Mara National Reserve, leave alone what's happening outside here. They are very prime. Most tourists will want to stay on community land. These are wildlife, these are community conservancies, and like come into the park, which is a little bit more crowded as compared to the outside. So this is a classic example of the conversion of the adjacent land to the Masai Mara as community conservation. We have Naivasha Conservancy, Lara Rock, and many others. All these communities have put their land for conservation purpose. And a number of fences have come up in some of these places. But now, as I say, they are putting them down because communities have realized the value of conservation with the time. And of course, these wildlife dispersal areas goes beyond all these. Migration of wildebeest used to come all the way up to here. We have them all the way to Ololunga, all these, but most of them have now been converted into fences and contributing to increasing loss of wildebeest and zebras and other wildlife in these areas. I just want to show examples of what has happened in terms of fencing when the fences started coming up in the Mara ecosystem. As you can see, there are just few fences up here, beyond Lemek, a few here, a few here. They moved in and got land and really established themselves. So these are just a few fences in 1995. But 10 years later, you can now see what has happened. More fences have actually come up with those these blue areas that you can see really, expanding, because those are areas that farming is taking place. In 2003, now you can see much more deeper and even down here, more fences are now started because of what has happened in terms of land subdivision, sales, and so on. It's becoming darker and darker. By 2010, fences all over. And by 2011, you can see all these are fences now. And 2024, wow, almost completely moving downwards into these critical dispersal areas and adjacent to the map. In 2016, those are the fences now. Really amazing when you look at them because they are so devastating to the wildlife and the biodiversity. So when you look at what happened between 1985 and 2016, this is now the scenario that we have seen or witnessed over the years. Fences coming up, and this is devastating wildlife because they cannot move to access resources where they used to go to breed, where they used to go for natural salt, where they used to go for water, and so on and so forth. And that has contributed to really declining wildlife populations. And these are just examples showing what happens. Lots of wildlife getting entangled into fences. These are simple barbed wire fences, but then we also have massive fences that are run by solar energy. We have these, giraffes also are not spared when they try to pass through the fences. Roads are proposed into the ecosystem, and we see infrastructure development as one of the threats because it actually also stops wildlife movement in some areas, And this was the proposed Serengeti Highway, which was very political over time. People went to court, and it was actually stopped. But the government still thinks that it's an important road that needs to be put up across Serengeti. And the people thought this will split Serengeti into two and to prevent wildebeest migration, from down Serengeti moving towards the northern part. Kenya went to court because it affects, it's a transboundary issue, and that's how this road was stopped. We've had a lot of roadkills happening in these areas, massive road development, especially on the Kenyan side, splitting the Savo ecosystem into two. We have the SGR, we have the older railway, we have the pipeline, we have the water lines, and so on. And this has actually stopped, especially big animals like elephants to continue moving across the ecosystem. Last, as I move towards the end, I want to say that a lot of changes have happened for conversions of land outside protected areas. I think I did mention that. There's massive conversion of grasslands, mostly grasslands, into agriculture. And then, of course, woodlands are coming up, mostly in some areas. But then when you look at the semi-protected areas and the protected areas, the vegetation is almost not disturbed as compared to what is happening outside protected areas. And that's where we're putting a lot of focus to ensure that communities focus on conservation-friendly activities. Some are willing to convert their land into conservancies and so on in the wildlife management areas so that we can secure the wildlife habitat. So all these things, I think
sorry, Nak, I don't want to disturb you, but actually your time is getting to its end. So if you could maybe go quickly through your slides or to say some, some key takeaways, because actually we should already move on to the next speaker.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I've talked about the corridors and of course conflict. Just an example of what's happening. Elephants getting into maize farms and getting into homes to look for food as well. Wake up, you get your roof ripped off by elephant while looking for food. They now know how to cross the fences very easily. They'll knock it down very easily and get into areas where they want to disperse. This is my last slide. There's massive bushmeat trade. This happened in Savo, I think last week. People arrested with motorbikes carrying a lot of bushmeat, and this has been happening over years, depleting the ecosystems with the wildlife. And what we are now looking at is nature-based solutions, sustainable consumption and production. And there are many approaches that are being tested and tried to see whether this could help to reduce the space to species conservation in the ecosystem. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ana, for a very interesting presentation. We had some technical issues with your audio. Sometimes it was better, sometimes not. And now I hope that our participants could hear what you were saying. And now we have to move on actually to the next presentation. So I hope you will stay with us also for the Q&A after all the presentations. Will you be able to stay with us also after all the presentations?
Yes,
okay,
yes, I'll
great.
Stay. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Noah, again. So now it's time to move on and to introduce our next speaker. So the next speaker is Hassan Ali Sukera. He's a wildlife biologist specialized in conducting ornithological surveys, wildlife assessment surveys, and environmental and social impact assessments. He is a national project director in 10 Billion Tree Tsunami program, and he has more than 15 years of experience of wildlife management while working with government and non-governmental organizations such as WWF Pakistan. While working with the World Wildlife Fund, he has been part of the team who worked in different projects related to wildlife conservation and forest cover monitoring, change analysis using geospatial techniques. He has published more than 30 scientific papers and has a degree in animal sciences, zoology, also received honors certificate course in wildlife management from Wildlife Institute of India, training Geoinformatics Center, Asian Institute of Technology, Bangkok, Thailand, and specialized training at Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, and also University of Tokyo in Japan. Thank you very much, Hasan, for being with us, and we are looking forward to your presentation now. So you can start to share your screen. Yes.
Hi everyone. Yes.
Hello, we cannot see you yet.
Okay, now.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you very much for the introduction. I would just like to share my screen here. Okay. I think you can see my presentation.
Yes, we can. Just go to full screen, please.
Is it okay now?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay, again, thank you very much. Welcome all. I would just be introducing 10 Billion Tree Tsunami program. And before actually going into detail of this particular project, I would like to just give some quick facts about the Pakistan, and then the idea why this project was started actually is that if you just see this particular map, this show physical diversity of Pakistan. You can see one part of Pakistan, southern side is at the 0 meter altitude, and the northern side actually goes up to 8611 meter. So there is in between, there is a huge physical diversity. And one can say that in 0 to 8,000, let's say 1,000 meter, there is a greatest change in elevation within any state. On the Keithar range, then lower Indus Basin is there. There is a Suleiman range, upper Indus Basin is also there. Then some area of the Pothohar region and the Indus Gorge going up to the K2, which is the second highest peak in the world. And similarly, if we talk about the faunal diversity, so that is due to 3 zoogeographical regions in this country, like the Palearctic, Oriental, and Ethiopian. There are 6 zoogeographical regions around the world, and out of the 6, 3 are there. And interestingly, Oriental and Palearctic region meets at the center of Pakistan, like the Indus, the mighty Indus River actually divide the Palearctic and Oriental fauna into 2 zoogeographic regions. And if we talk about the ecoregions, there are around 200 global ecoregions as categorized by the WWF of Pakistan. And out of those, 205 lies within Pakistan, like Arabian Sea, Indus Delta, Run of Kutch, Tibetan Plateau, and Western Himalayan ecoregion. And due to this particular physical, zoogeographical, great diversity within the fauna and flora of Pakistan, we can see the example, like there are around 668 species of birds, 174 species of mammals, 210 species of reptiles, 24 species of amphibians, more than 6,000 species of invertebrates and insects, and more than 6,000 species of plants. And there are around 37 species of mammals, and 25 species of birds are threatened with the according to IUCN red listing. And also there are around 500 species of plants which have become rare. So again, coming to the issues. So if we just divide them into 2 major categories, the forest and the wildlife, then there are issues related to commercial logging, overexploitation of forest for fuel and fodder, livestock grazing, which prevents regeneration, and there is overgrazing, and there is a conversion of agricultural lands. And talking about wildlife, hunting, poaching, habitat degradation, fragmentations are major threats to the wildlife. So, keeping aforementioned in view, a great project, 10 Billion Tree Tsunami program was started, and which actually aims for the forest landscape restoration and revival of the wildlife resources in Pakistan. If I just talk about a quick review of the project, Prime Minister of Pakistan launched this particular program on 2nd September 2018, and that day was declared as a Plant for Pakistan Day. This particular project is divided into 2 phases. Currently, we are undergoing the phase 1, in which our plantation target is 3.296 billion trees. Duration is 4 years, and this particular project is led by Ministry of Climate Change at the federal level, and our implementation partner are government, provincial, and the territorial forest and wildlife departments. And there is a national strategic sports unit which is headed by me at Islamabad also. So if now talking about the objectives, the core objective of the project is enhancement of forest cover. As I said, the project is divided into 2 phases. Overall, we are aiming at the 10 billion trees. And in the first phase, we are going to plant 3.289 billion trees, and in the second phase, rest of those plantation will be carried out. And the major component of the project comprises of these afforestation drive, and a part of it is also the biodiversity conservation. As I earlier said, there are great threats to fauna of the country. So we also decided to actually conserve flora and fauna through actually in situ and ex situ conservation initiatives led by the provincial wildlife departments. And we are also actually enhancing our protected area by actually creating new protected areas, especially national parks, leading to the wildlife resources within the country. An interesting part is that this not only is actually conserving the wildlife diversity, enhancing the forest cover, is also contributing in the socio-economic uplift in the country, because as all of us knows that COVID actually hit major portion of economy all over the world. During this particular COVID scenario, our project created more than 86,000 green jobs, and a lot of poor people were actually inducted for the afforestation drives. Also, this project actually is in line with the international commitments like UNFCCC, UNCCD, CBD, and SDG. And ultimately, our main objective going down to the climate resilient environment, including the reduced level of CO2. If we particularly talk about enhancement of forest cover, there are 4 tiers within the afforestation. One is we are actually supporting assisted natural regeneration by actually appointing forest negabans. Forest negabans is kind of the private community guards. Those are being hired, leading to the green jobs, and they actually protect the certain part of the forest land which is undergoing the natural regeneration. Second one is the linear plantation. We are planting trees along the canals, along the roads. And the third one is the block plantation. There are certain state land and the private areas which are being afforested by the respective departments, and also private peoples are encouraged to get plants, saplings from the government side, and they actually plant those on the private lands. And one of the core part of the project is raising nurseries. There are two types of nurseries. One is the government nurseries. All those plants are being raised in the government nurseries and the private nurseries. And we are actually engaging communities in raising nurseries and again purchasing those plants and planting them into the target focus areas. So far, if we talk about our achievement, we have planted till date 1 billion trees from the start of the project. And recently, Prime Minister of Pakistan planted on 27th May 1 billionth tree of our program. And these there are around 7,375 sites on which these plantations are going on, and this covers more than 400,000 hectare area within the country so far. And talking about the other initiative, apart from the afforestation, we are doing certain in situ and ex situ conservation projects. In situ conservation projects include habitat enrichment and reintroduction of species, threatened species, and ex situ conservation initiative includes majorly on the breeding development of breeding centers and the rehabilitation centers of certain threatened fauna. And there are certain other initiatives within the particular umbrella project is actually supporting the protected area initiative. Project is funding to 23 protected areas across Pakistan, out of which 15 national parks are newly created, and the project is supporting green jobs, ecotourism, species conservation within these protected areas. We are also supporting academia for the forestry and wildlife research, and engaging. We have planned to engage around 300 students for MPhil and PhD support under the project. We are also actually undergoing certain awareness raising campaigns. We are engaging youth through youth eco internship program actually, and also these youth or internship program actually supporting us within the plantation drives and the awareness raising among other communities as well. Our project is supported with geospatial technology for the forest monitoring and assessment. We are actually, as I earlier said, there are around 7,375 sites. We are taking temporal data of all those particular sites and actually monitoring them physically and remotely using the geospatial technology. Last but not the least, actually, we are also having third-party monitoring consortium led by FAO in partnership of IUCN, W Pakistan, through funding from the KFW, which are actually monitoring our activities apart from our internal monitoring also. Next is keeping in view the intensity and the gravity of the project. We have starting a digital reporting platform. All the activities, physical and financial activities, are being undergoing the program are reported through a dashboard. So and there are several logins, and at the end, at the user end, all the data is being input by the nodes, provincial nodes, and at our end, we are actually monitoring all the data physically and remotely as well. We are also using GIS and remote sensing based technology to actually have a change analysis of the sites which are undergoing the plantations, and this data will soon be available on our website, which is also under construction. As a way forward, we are also planning to actually launch Pakistan Biodiversity Information System under the project, which will be in line with the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. This will be of its kind, as the GBIF is only using the secondary data sources, and we are planning to actually incorporate primary biodiversity data being gathered by the researcher, wildlife experts in the field, and incorporating into the Pakistan Biodiversity Information System. Also, this PBIS will be actually strengthening us to go through some consultative sessions for national red data listing. As you know, the IUCN has been doing this particular red data listing for the global, in a global perspective, but there is a great need to actually have a national red data listing for all the species. So the Pakistan Biodiversity Information System will also be supporting this particular second initiative. Will be also our core target again is the afforestation, and we'll be doing it in coming years. All these particular targets and the activities will be monitored through the geospatial technologies. Also, we are also planning to actually launch a nationwide forest cover assessment using remote sensing and GIS technologies, and we'll be publishing a district-wise forest cover assessment reports, which will be our first of its kind within Pakistan. And last but not the least is also the preparation for the phase 2, because this phase 1 is around 35% of the total target, which is 10 billion afforestation drive. And yes, this gonna strengthen us for the preparation of phase 2. So that's all from my side, and thank you very much for listening me.
Thank you very much, Hassan, for a very interesting presentation about the 10 Billion Tree Tsunami program. So I would like to ask you, what do you see as the biggest challenge when it comes to fulfilling the goals of this project?
Yes, the biggest challenge actually is to engage communities. As you know, that everything is related to economics. So we actually had to tilt our scheme of action in a way that the peoples get engaged into the afforestation and the wildlife conservation. That's why some sort of incentives are being provided to the people in the form of green jobs, in the form of like engaging communities in wildlife conservation, leading to the trophy hunting. So that's how actually this was the major actually issue for us, and we have coped by using this particular initiative.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And when do you think this project will be finalized, and how it will influence the life of people living in the area and close to the area?
The results have started come out since it has been like 1.5 years. The project is ongoing, and still we have we'll be actually taking this project to minimum 7 more years. So this is you can say it's a kind of kickstart of the project, and we are getting outcome in the form of afforestation of around like more than 400,000 hectare area, and also engagement of communities within the purview of the project in the form of green jobs. So outcomes are there, and I hope things will be in a positive way in future also.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you very much again for this presentation and sharing this project. Now it's time to move on and to introduce the next speaker. So thank you again, Hassan. Yes, so the next speaker is Mr. Arman Koit. I hope I'm pronouncing a good name. Arman is the CEO and founder of Nanom. Nanom develops unique nanotechnology materials, designs, and techniques which dramatically transform the battery market. Their high surface area nanoparticles greatly increase the size and surface of batteries' electrodes, creating more efficient energy storage. Think of doubling the capacity of the gigabattery factory at half the cost by using nano-enhanced materials. Previously, Arman was the VP of Marketing at Decode, and as an account executive at McCann Erickson, Arman developed and managed campaigns for Coca-Cola, Domino's, and other major brands. Arman also took part in Stanford's StartX Mentor Labs for outstanding entrepreneurs. Thank you very much, Arman, for being with us, and we are looking forward to your presentation now.
Yeah, hi everybody. Very nice to be here today. I'm excited to talk about this topic, and it's a matter that's basically behind the reason why we started this company was to impact the world in a bigger way. So today I'm gonna basically give you a little overview of my company, and I'm gonna give you some examples of how the technology that we're developing can impact climate and help the world, both from the viewpoint of the past, the present, and the future. So let me just share my presentation here. So I hope everybody can see the screen.
Yes, it's fine.
Okay. All right. So first of all, my name is Arman Kojic. I'm actually from Iceland. My grandfather immigrated to Iceland in the 1950s, which gave me this non-Icelandic surname. He met my grandmother on a blind date in New York, so the world is small. And we built this, you know, Iceland is kind of known for building the whole society on sustainability and on green energy. And the reason why Iceland catapulted as a nation was because we discovered the, you know, fishing as an industry, but we tapped into geothermal energy. And, you know, Icelanders are used to kind of leaving the windows open in their apartments and to have the heat up at a maximum level. And there's something about an abundance of energy that is very comforting, and it can do a lot for a nation to have access to energy without restrictions. So Nanom is built on a vision to, it's basically a company name is taken from the word nano and ohm. Ohm is the universe, life, and everything, and we use the building blocks of life, which is nanotechnology, molecular level implementations to impact the world. And we believe that real change comes from within ourselves, from within the products that we make, from within the planet. And that's really the power of what nanotechnology can do. You can kind of rewrite the rules a little bit from within the product without changing things in manufacturing, without affecting how things are set up. And whether we like it or not, we're on a trajectory with a lot of things, like how we manufacture batteries, how we manufacture cars, how we manufacture in general. And the path of least resistance is to offer added value from within without changing things in the structure. So we have this vision. If you imagine a tomorrow where you can drive your car on a single charge across the entire US or the world, where your phone doesn't need charging for a month. But the ultimate battery is having no battery at all. That's really the objective, is for you not to notice where the energy comes from, but for you to basically have the best user experience there is. And we give our partners and we give them a competitive advantage by unlocking value from within. And it's kind of an exciting superpower to have, to be able to affect products from within, and I'll get into that. We are a team of 17 located in Europe. I'm in Palo Alto right now, not at the office because it's so early here, and the team in Europe is a lab with a lot of very, very smart people. We have great backing and support throughout. We are backed by Village Global, that has LPs and visionaries like Reid Hoffman, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos. We're backed by the Iceland Venture Studio, and we've been awarded the European Green Deal funding and Nordic Startup Awards, climate startup of Iceland. But on to the exciting stuff. So what does it really mean? What is this thing called nanotechnology? It's a little kind of abstract. Well, what's really interesting is that once you start accessing that technology, you can make products more efficient, you can make them more flexible, you can make them smarter, and you can make them more tolerant. Nanotechnology is manipulating matter from within, and you're changing the attributes. So that can be anything from having a coating on a paint that pushes away water better, so that you don't need to redo the hulls of your boat, which can have a huge environmental impact. It can be something like putting nanoparticles inside of batteries so that they last longer, so that we have a less of an impact on the planet. If we go at the current rate of demand for batteries, we are just gonna deplete the planet of every single raw material that goes into these batteries. And the solution to that is to swap out these large amounts of material. If you look at the amount of raw material that goes into making all the cells that go into a single Tesla, it's several kilograms of each material, and that, according to the market demand for these types of cars, it's an arithmetic that kind of doesn't work out. So this is what you can do with nanotechnology. And today I'm going to give you 3 examples of our own technology inside of products from the past, from the present, and how we can impact the future. So if you look at what the real issue is with batteries and energy and sustainability, it is like that our perceived, what we want to get out of the technology and the rate at which it moves, everything is just not keeping up. We're not keeping up with exponential growth, and this push to make things last longer, to have better performance while keeping the cost down, while not having to scrap the whole gigafactory is kind of the premise here. And what's interesting is that the solution already exists. Nanotechnology has already been proven to deal with these issues, but it's been kind of stuck in a lab. There was a lot of hype around it, and I've talked to people at Solar City and Tesla that have talked about amazing things they've been able to pull off in an R&D lab, but getting it out of the R&D lab into mass manufacturing is always the issue. And what's really interesting about our technology is that it bypasses that. It's a way to mass produce nanoparticles and to keep the purity level very high and the surface area in a way that's ideal for batteries. It also works on all the key ingredients that go into a battery manufacturer, into a battery for a battery manufacturer. And the source of how we process things is the same source material that's already being put into batteries. To translate that into human speak, it means that you don't have to change the setup of your factory. You don't have to change the way that you make batteries. You can start implementing these nanoparticles into the production method. And it's like any time in history where we've unlocked ways to really scale up a technology, that's when it truly becomes available. And that's when you can truly start addressing the issues. So as an example of the product of today, which is the regular lithium-ion battery, you can design tailored nanoparticles into these batteries to increase the energy surface area so that you have more space to store energy. You can deal with issues that are going on inside of the battery where you're eating up the materials inside and causing the cycle life not to be good and efficient, which has the environmental impact. The shorter the battery lasts in a lifetime, the more you have to regenerate them. So with this kind of input of nanoparticles into the production method, you can get that low cost per kilowatt hour. You can address the overheating and the instability, which means no more Teslas on fire on the freeway. you can increase the energy density, and more importantly, you can also start being more earth friendly. The first example is today's battery, but I'm also going to talk about how to make environmentally friendly batteries compete head-to-head with lithium ion. So how do we do this? We have something called a particle accelerator, which is an incredibly interesting technology that basically does very secretive things behind the scenes, but allows us to get a very high yield and to manipulate materials that go into a battery. What we can also do is we can combine different materials, and that results in you being able to stabilize the battery more, and in that the reactions inside the battery become very different. Now, you know, without getting kind of too nerdy, what this really means for the outside world is that you can start designing solutions from within and changing products from within, and keep the same manufacturing methods that you're using, and you can also reduce the cost, because you know, it's very interesting when you have a solution that can have a huge impact on the environment. If it doesn't make economic sense, you're kind of in trouble, because that becomes a harder sell. So the fact that you can replace key materials, use less of what goes inside, increase capacity while keeping the cost lower than you have today, that's kind of a sweet spot, and that's what the core of our technology allows us to do. So what it means is that it creates these unique particles that kind of look like cornflakes when you start zooming in on them, and it happens that the shape of these particles is ideal for energy storage. And it's kind of a new frontier. It's a very interesting frontier. I mean, Elon Musk was on stage talking about nanotechnology when it got to the part where he explains how to get it into mass manufacturing. That's where the discussion sometimes stops, because people don't have that kind of bridge. And that's our sweet spot, to be that bridge from both giving you that kind of competitive edge and to be that bridge into manufacturing. And again, what that means for the battery of today is that you are able to go in and give an existing manufacturer a competitive edge, or to be the enabler of a new technology that's, you know, the new lithium ion batteries, the new chemistries that are coming out. Sometimes they've already proven that the battery works with a certain nano size inside, but they don't know how to implement it into mass manufacturing. And that's where we come in. We kind of are that bridge to making something that is a vision and a prototype into a mass reality. But this is how you implement the technology of today. But let's talk about an interesting use case that we actually got funding for through the European Union Green Deal. So this is Thomas Edison. He made a battery more than 100 years ago that went into the electric car. That battery is still being used in stationary storage today. The reason why it's used in stationary storage is because it has a really long cycle life. It is in essence made out of nickel and iron. It's made out of materials that are not as harmful as what's inside of a lithium ion cell. But the problem with this battery has always been that it's very heavy, very inefficient in manufacturing, because you need to create it out of these kind of larger metal plates that just take up a lot of space, and they're very heavy, which makes them, you know, ideal for stationary storage, but they used to be focused on the cars. Now, so what we did with this battery is that we replaced the bigger plates of how the battery is usually made, and we replaced it with carbon fiber and nanoparticles on top. So it's like the equivalent of kind of going down to, you know, instead of having a big block of salt, you're doing table salt in volume and size, and you're getting the same efficiency, but you're making the size of the battery 1/10 of what it is before. So what that means is that, you know, all of a sudden there's a battery with a lower environmental impact in the value chain, a battery that's already been established as a good battery to pair with windmills with solar panels because of its longevity, but you're now being able to put it into effect and to have more power, more punch, more effectiveness, and kind of work on the downsides of that incredible technology, which was that, you know, you're reducing the cost, you're making it more effective, and you're dealing with the size and the weight. So what's interesting is that we're moving at a very fast rate to put up solar panels, to put up windmills, where the issue of like how we collect the energy or how we get the energy is not really the thing to figure out. The thing is to be constantly collecting the energy, like from the windmill that's running 24/7, from the solar panel that's constantly being hit by the sun. You should be taking in that energy at a more effective rate. And the same in my home country with geothermal energy. That's energy that's ongoing. And this is what this type of battery does. And, you know, if you start replacing just one part of the batteries that are already being produced in the marketplace with this type of technology, you're all of a sudden saving tons of CO2 because you're able to make the batteries live longer, and you're able to dispose of those batteries in a completely different way than what you've done before. And, you know, it's made possible because you're in essence taking something. So like if I'm holding a business card and that business card has a front and a back, that's like the equivalent of what the Edison is using with their battery plates. If I now cut that business card into 1 billion pieces, I have several football fields of surface area instead of the front and the back of the business card. And that's in essence what you're doing, is that you're increasing the surface area and you're increasing these kind of the ability to store energy and to interact with the battery. You're not changing the chemistry. And what's interesting about our technology is that we adjust to the chemistry at hand. We're not trying to sell one specific material. We're selling a unique insight into how to get more out of these battery materials. And, you know, then you can finally deal with, you know, this kind of renewable energy opportunity that is out there, because you're not cutting the chain of opportunity in half because you don't have the solution to one end of the spectrum. You know, so we believe that this is going to be at the core of this type of circular economy outlook for the world. The next thing I wanted to show you was how to create the batteries of tomorrow, because the Edison battery is an example of how you take an existing technology that isn't quite up to speed and you bring it up to speed using nanotechnology. So you take the strengths and you fix the weaknesses. What we have also done, because when we were showing what our nanoparticles could do, we are in essence a materials company that had to exhibit what our particles could do inside of battery cells and inside of products. And one thing that we did is we created what's called a structural battery. So that means that the structure itself becomes the energy source. And that can have a huge impact on the environment. It can have a huge impact on how we design products and how we look at what a battery is, what a product is. If we're going to make the reality of self-driving flying cars that take you to work, we can't have 3 baby elephants in the back seat that are our batteries. We'd rather be driving ourselves further, longer, and think about the design implications. If you are designing an airplane around aerodynamic flow, not around the battery. If you look at your phone is a glorified battery holder. That's all it is. What would a phone look like that didn't have to think about where the energy source was coming from? It would be a plate of glass. You know, that would, so you can sort of open up a whole new world of possibilities with this type of approach. And what it means, these two guys are holding up the frame of a BMW that already is made out of carbon fiber. Now imagine if that was all energy structure. So what we did was that we created these unique nanostructures that we put into carbon fiber, and we created a solid state battery out of 3 layers of carbon fiber and a silk weave in the middle. What we realized from talking to companies and talking to car manufacturers was that for the products of today, it's ideal to think about this type of technology as a booster technology. That means that you use it to get the best of both worlds, because a battery like this is fast charging, it doesn't heat up, and it's a solid state battery, which is kind of the equivalent of how you can take in energy from the sun, from a charging station, from wherever. It kind of changes the rules of that. With a lithium ion battery, you have to be very careful. You have to be very selective on how fast you charge it, because that's where the mess starts. With this type of battery, you don't have to concern yourself with that type of effect. You can sort of start to basically charge faster, and that gives you a lot of really interesting opportunities for how to grow and how to use a technology like this. So again, we have that vision where the products, the way to get this type of technology into the marketplace is to not change things in manufacturing, but to give people a new type of carbon fiber that so also happens to be an energy source material. But you can, once you start designing products around what makes sense for the user, you can take that even a step further. So like, for example, if you're putting it inside a boat hull, you might put one material that enables the energy storage, and you might put another material that pushes away water more effectively, or makes the carbon fiber stronger, or you do the same effect inside of other materials. So for example, we talked to a airline company, and the interesting thing is there, if you want to put a structural battery inside a wing, it takes you about 10 years of safety studies and implementations. But if you want to put them in every single seat on the airplane, you can do that straight away. And what do you do once you get on an airplane? You plug in your phone, you start using the electricity. The biggest environmental impact is actually from taking the plane from the place where you load the passengers to the place where you take off. So if that could be electric, you would also solve. So there's a lot of these hybrid solutions to think about that can impact the environment. So to give you one more example, that's kind of a fun and interesting one with a structural battery. So let's say that you had a structural battery within a hybrid car, and this is just a random picked hybrid car. What you have with the lithium ion battery is that you are capped at the C rate where you're basically in a car like that, you're going to work and you're braking so many times. This is like basically how many times you're sort of accelerating and decreasing speed, and all of that time you're pumping the brakes and you are creating energy there. That energy kind of goes to waste. You're using a low percentage of that because the lithium ion battery can't handle it. Now, if you look at the average trip of a car, 80% of our trips are 10 kilometers or lower, and you can be both using a structural battery for that part of the journey, and you can be using regenerative braking to charge up those batteries as you go through the journey, if you have a battery type that doesn't explode or heat up and is able to accept the energy way faster than what you would anticipate. So what that thinking does as well, this type of if you had a structural battery in part of your car and lithium ion batteries in the other part of the car, you can also be using the structural battery for those shorter trips. You can be using the structural battery as a way to basically charge your car faster than ordering a coffee, because it's a fast charging battery. The other one you could charge on over a longer period of time. But if you mix the two together, what's interesting is that you start saving the capacity of the lithium ion, because you have like the front runner is your structural battery, and then the lithium ion battery becomes the one you kick into when you need it. but it means you can, in essence, triple the lifetime of the lithium-ion battery through this type of mixing together these types of different technologies. So the steps to giving a glimpse into this future can be done in kind of a few steps, instead of thinking that we need to redesign the car from scratch. You can even use a structural battery just to save on wiring, to just light that one light bulb where it takes X number of man hours to get the wire in so that you light this one light bulb. So there's a lot of opportunity for changing products from within when we start thinking outside the box and outside of the box of what a battery is. And this is kind of a little more data on what I was saying about the range of these batteries and how you can change the cycle life. Yeah, so this is actually a pilot that we did in Iceland in 2019. We created a 1 meter boat that was made out of a structural battery. This was just to showcase the technology in a live environment, and it so happens that Icelanders are surrounded by water, and a boat was a very ideal place to put in structural batteries. But we envision a future where our materials will enable this kind of next revolution of these devices. So to summarize, we have this vision of a future where nanoparticles play a huge part in enhancing the technologies of today that are your lithium-ion batteries without you noticing anything, without the manufacturer having to change things in their behavior. And we tackle the environmental problem from within. We innovate from within the product. And then we redefine. The future is about redefining what a product is, what a user experience is. If we are truly focused on the user and the task at hand, we just all want to play our part towards this more sustainable future. And we want to be buying products that encapsulate that. We want to be, using technologies that get us there. But as a user, you don't necessarily have to analyze too much what's going on. You should just be able to have that experience of getting in your car or being flown away in your new vehicle. And we see ourselves as a catalyst for that type of revolution, for us to work with powerful partners that access the power of our technology mixed in with their industry expertise. And that way we can tackle the environmental angle and build a brighter future using our strengths. And I think that's kind of it for my presentation. So
thank you very much. Thank you very much, Arman, for this presentation about nanotechnology. So we have some question in the chat. Yes, so Amanka is asking, is the nanotechnology just environmental friendly on the value chain? What is the environmental impact of the nano battery production in itself as opposed to the normal battery? And also, is there any difference as to how battery with nanotechnology is disposed after use or when permanently damaged, and how can that aid battery waste or electronic waste in general?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the way to impact batteries today is kind of more about getting more out of the battery with less material. So you're kind of working on the part of the value chain where you're not depleting the planet of the source materials that go into battery manufacturing. That's kind of the first box, is not to change very much in the chemistry, but just to kind of get the same effect with less material, and to basically make a kilogram of cobalt go into thousands of batteries versus hundreds of batteries, or whatever the premise is. So you're kind of working on that.
How you're saying, like when you
sorry, carry on.
Sorry. No, sorry.
Yeah. And then on the other end of the spectrum, it's about if you can work with manufacturers to recreate the chemistries or use an existing technology like the Edison battery, then you're able to be fully environmentally friendly on the disposable side. So it sort of depends on the partner you're working with, but the technology allows for both. It's more a question of how many resources you've already put into a battery factory and how much you can make the change without investing in new ones, or who's willing to invest in new ways of looking at it.
Thank you. Another question, is it possible to implement these nanobatteries for more structural projects like buildings and other civil facilities?
Yes, absolutely. And it can even combine a few approaches. So like even the Nano Edison that you looked at is in essence can be built fully out of different building materials. So you kind of have more freedom in that you can recycle a known battery type that you already know has a long cycle life and does its job really well. And you can start implementing that into building materials. So, that can either be new buildings where the roof tiles become a solar panel simultaneously that is taking in the energy, that is then also pumping energy into the grid, or it can be, retroactively fitted where you like take new flooring, for example, or new doors, and you make that be energy sources that completely change the way your home operates and the way your home stores energy.
Thank you. And when do you think it will be possible to really see this nanotechnology in our normal lives? Like when it will happen?
Well, I can say that we are actually working on a lot of very exciting pilot projects that can get a glimpse into that future. The funny thing is you are using nanotechnology a lot without knowing it. There's some in when you put sunscreen on, there can be things in that. There can be things in the mask that you're unfortunately wearing these days. Nanotechnology is everywhere, but the question is, where can you have the biggest environmental impact in the quickest amount of way? And we think that's through adjusting ourselves to the existing landscape and reinventing the future with those partners once we adjust to their current needs, to then show them a glimpse into the future. But yeah, so I think it's already here and it's around the corner. So keep looking out for it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much again, Armand, for your presentation and for being with us. So now it's time to move and to introduce our last speaker today. So thank you again for your attendance here.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
And now our last speaker is Mr. Todd Barber. Todd Barber is the chairman in the Reef Ball Foundation. He is an expert in designed artificial reefs and their application worldwide, combining robust business, international computer, and marine biology expertise, aid him in the management of a vast network of non-profits, authorized contractors, and partners to lead the effort to rehabilitate oceanic reef ecosystems throughout the world. Mr. Barber has personally worked in over 55 countries and visited many more. He works tirelessly teaching designed artificial reef technologies, coral propagation, coral planting, and red mangrove planting to people interested in aiding their local marine habitats. So thank you very much, Todd, for being with us, and we are looking forward to your presentation about the Reef Ball Foundation.
Hi. My name is Todd Barber. I'm chairman of the Reef Ball Foundation. We're here to talk about climate change and sustainability. And when we think about climate change, one of the biggest impacts of climate change is our oceans. And in particular, coral reefs are changing quite a bit. So I'm going to give you a presentation about how we've gone about restoring marine habitat worldwide over the last 30 years. If you'd like to, I'm going to play a little short 3-minute video to give you a background on my foundation. If you'd like to play that from that side.
Sure, just a second.
Nothing is more vital to life on our planet than our Earth's oceans, which cover 71% of the Earth's surface, contain 97% of the Earth's water, and provide over half of all the world's oxygen. Coral reefs are the only living things on Earth that can be seen from space. Unfortunately, our planet's ocean systems are at a dangerous tipping point because of the ever-increasing pressures they face. Unless significant action is taken, more than 90% of coral reefs will be severely threatened by 2030, and virtually all reefs will be at risk by 2050. preserving the rainforest of the sea for future generations is critical. That's why, for more than 2 decades, the Reef Ball Foundation has worked to protect and restore our ocean ecosystems with our innovative Reef Ball technology. Reef balls are modules that mimic the structure and function of natural reefs and many other marine applications. They are used throughout the world in pioneering coral transplant technology and in restoration projects for oysters, mangroves, fisheries, lobsters, and sea turtles. They are also employed to create erosion control projects, living shorelines and seawalls, memorial reefs, and even projects for birds. We have conducted over 6,000 projects in over 70 countries and deployed over 600,000 reef balls. As a result of Reef Ball's efforts, 54 billion kilograms of biomass will be added to the Earth's oceans in the next 500 years. Education and community involvement are, and have always been, essential to our work. Our hands-on educational projects, as well as extensive community participation, not only help raise public awareness to the importance and vulnerability of our oceans, they actually engage people throughout the globe in the work we're doing. Needless to say, our success would not be possible without the support of countless volunteers, teachers, team members, and allies around the world. Reef Ball Foundation works with governments, businesses, schools, community groups, and people like you who are interested in protecting and preserving our oceans and the life that flourishes within them. Our work and our oceans ultimately depend on you. Please join us in our fight to protect them, and in the meantime, take a deep breath and thank our oceans for what they do for us. For more information about our work and how you can help, please visit our website, www.reefballfoundation.org.
Okay, so basically that gives you a little bit of background on what the Reef Ball Foundation does. I want to put it in a more hands-on perspective. Basically, we have developed mold systems that allow us to go anywhere in the world, take these molds, teach local people how to build reef balls, how to deploy them properly in the water, how to propagate and plant corals on them if they're in a coral reef environment, how to arrange them to protect a beach, or whatever resource that a regular coral reef could provide to grow a new natural reef system. And we do this in 70 countries around the world, and we try to partner with local community groups to accomplish these tasks.
Sorry to interrupt you, but could you please also share your screen so we can see your presentation?
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought the last screen was shared. Let me share it back.
It's fine.
Is it shared back now?
No, we cannot see now.
Okay, I got it. There we go. So it was the wrong screen.
No, but actually we are still not seeing your screen.
Oh, okay. Let's try that.
Yes, now it will work.
Okay, I lost. Okay, I see. Okay, so the reef ball, to give you an idea, is a designed reef. It's used to restore ailing coral reefs, often for fishing and scuba diving. We make it out of a special concrete. Concrete doesn't grow reef very well because it has a really high pH. So we came up with a concrete that has the same pH as the natural seawater. This allows hard corals and marine life to attach and grow better than regular concrete. We also make them in 11 different sizes, and we try to match a natural reef. So for example, if we go into an area and you have one coral reef, we look at the number of fish and sizes of the fish, what types of marine life are there, and we try to mimic that as closely as possible. We find that mimicking Mother Nature does better than trying to do better. So if we find more fish or less fish on our reef balls than the natural reef, we would say that's not a perfect reef. So we would try to do larger sizes if we needed more large fish, or smaller sizes if we needed smaller fish, for example. The way reef balls are made, it's a fiberglass mold system that can be compacted down to be shipped anywhere in the world in a pallet or in a container. You pull them apart, set them up. We have a polyform buoy like holds boats apart that goes in the center of it, tether balls on the side, and then we pour concrete around it. The reason for all the inflatable bladders, that allows us to make interconnected holes. Fish like to have more than one entrance and exit. If they're trying to get away from another fish, they like to have multiple escape routes, if you will. So the inflatable technology allows us to design concrete very simply that has much more complex shapes than traditional molds. As I mentioned, we have 11 different sizes. They range from as small as a basketball to over 5,000 kilograms. And we do many different sizes and shapes. The round is the basic dome that starts out because it's the most stable when it comes to storms. But we also do ledges, and then we add holes and textures and other features for fish. No two reef balls are alike. Every reef ball is custom made for the particular application. Here's an example of what the mold systems look like being set up. You see that they're totally reusable. So once a client has been trained how to use these and we have them on site, they can continue to make reef balls for as long as they want. In the 30 years we've been doing this, we've put down almost 1 million reef balls, and we've restored 1/2% of all the coral that we've lost in my lifetime. Now that means if there were 200 companies like mine, we would be keeping up with the damage that we're doing to our coral reefs, primarily from climate change and human activities. So we're trying to do something positive and put something back to mitigate some of the changes that man causes on the planet. Those inflatable bladders that we talked about, they can be made to different sizes. We can be textured and they can be placed in different places. So for example, an octopus might like a different size hole than a snapper. So we can actually engineer each reef ball different using the exact same mold. So the training teaches people how to look at their local environment, find out what type of reef they want to build, and to customize their mold and learn how to set it up to create the best possible reef. As I mentioned, our concrete is pH neutralized. It's also abrasion resistant. We found that you can't do a lot of things like in traditional construction. Most people want to make a nice smooth wall when they're building a house. Well, coral and marine life has a hard time attaching onto smooth surfaces. And so we roughen up the surface texture and put rocks and things on the outside of it to allow those fish to attach on. We also find that iron, for example, that is used in construction, the rebar that goes in the house that makes things very strong. Iron is actually a fertilizer that you use in your garden. So you would think, well, that might not be so good for the ocean because fertilizer would make algae grow that would overgrow the coral. And that's true. In addition, iron degrades very quickly in the sea. Reef balls are designed to last more than 500 years because the corals themselves are going to continue to grow into eons. They don't age like we do. They just keep reproducing as a colony. And so we can't use rebar because the reef ball would fall apart before the corals reach their full maturity. So we use a really, really strong concrete, something that's was used in making bridges. And that allows us to not have to use that rebar. We also, when we first made reef balls, we realized that one of the limitations is cost. We're trying to keep cost as minimal as possible because we need millions of reefs out there to make up for the damage that we're doing. In order to keep the costs low, we had to use the minimum amount of concrete we could. It also makes it easier to handle. So we had to go to scientific organizations and use wave tanks and design shapes and a distribution of weight to allow the reef balls not to move without anchors so they could be easily deployed. So 80% of the weight is in the bottom 20% of every reef ball, only 20% in the top. So it's thin tops, it's a thick bottom, and they can't actually be flipped by a wave. So that's all part of the engineering of the shape and size of the reef balls. We also wanted to make them where they could be deployed by a barge and a crane in a heavily industrialized country very easily. which is pretty easy to do with heavy concrete if you live in a big city and you have access to that equipment, but it's expensive. And we tend to work around the world in often developing countries, sometimes people with limited tools or limited resources. So we can take that same center bladder that we use to create the hole in the middle of the reef ball where the fish live, put it back into the reef ball after it's cured, inflate it back up with air, and we can literally float these things. We can turn them on their side, roll them into the beach. You can swim them out. You can tow them out by a jet ski, a small boat, get them to the exact spot you want. Let's say you have some natural coral in the area. You don't want to drop the reef ball and hit the coral. So instead you can float it and with divers control exactly where you put it, place it right where you want it, remove the bladder, and you have a very inexpensive deployment, which is a big part of the cost of doing artificial reefs. For larger projects, of course, we can use barges and boats, and that allows efficiency. If you're doing 100,000 reef balls, or like we're doing 14,000 reef balls right now in Virginia, we have a crane that's designed to do 100 reef balls at a time. So they literally take 100 reef balls from the barge, drop them to the bottom. They are automatically released in a predetermined pattern that's best for, in that case, oysters. We do more than just coral reefs. We do oyster reefs, we do kelp reefs, we do cold water reefs, temperate reefs, seafood reefs, all different types of reefs that you might imagine. As I mentioned before, we have to be very careful on how we place the reef balls in the bottom. One, because there may be marine life nearby. Two, because how you array your reefs can make a huge difference in the productivity of a reef. A single reef ball has a hole in the middle where the fish can get out of the current and hide from other fish, but there's only so many fish that can fit into a single reef ball. Whereas if we put, for example, 5 reef balls together and we put them close enough together that there's habitat space between each one, that same void that's in the center, the fish can live between the reef balls. So by spacing them in clusters and groups, we're increasing the amount of habitat that we're creating and leveraging the amount of concrete we use and the productivity of the reef itself. Growth rates on reefs are determined by environmental conditions. That means if we put a reef ball in a pristine coral reef area, we're going to get a pristine coral reef. If we put a reef ball in a pristine or in a coral reef area where there's water quality problems, for example, fertilizer runoff or global warming, the reef balls are going to face the same problems as coral do. So we, first of all, have the structure there for the fish to begin living right away so they don't have to wait for the coral to grow. Secondly, sometimes we have to engineer the reefs just like you would your backyard. So we may have to take clippings from imperiled corals, corals that are slated to die, for example, from a dredging project, or corals that have been grown in a farm and have been raised to be resilient against hot water, for example, which is one of the side effects of climate change. And then we can plant those corals onto the reef balls and we can grow the reef that's going to grow best in that particular area. That allows us to put reefs back in areas where you couldn't otherwise put reefs. Still, we often try to connect with other partners that can improve the water quality while we're doing the reef balls so they will continue to grow naturally into the prior coral reef as we get climate change under control and face other human issues and solve them. Reef balls have the same marine life as natural coral reefs. We've documented over 100 scientific studies throughout the years, and they're designed to not interfere with anything. So we have specific sizes so turtles can't get trapped in them. We have designs for lobsters. We have designs for oysters. So virtually any reef that you've ever dove, reef balls can support the same life. And again, we measure ourselves by that. In fact, you've probably dove some reef ball reefs and not even known that they were reef ball reefs because they don't look like reef ball reefs after time. They grow into natural reefs. This is an example of some layer cakes. Layer cakes are still based on the reef ball shape. They're made by pouring sand instead of those voids or those giant balls that we put in the reef balls. We put a layer of concrete down, we put structure between it, and we add sand, more structure, a layer of sand, and we keep building them up, each one being crafted by the artist, if you will, building that. At the end of the demolding process, we wash the sand out and we place those down. That allows us to make ledges for things like lobsters and the types of fish that need an overhang. Again, they use the same molds. Here's some just pretty pictures and examples of some reef balls after they begin to grow. You see they begin to start to look more and more natural over time. This is the basis of our coral propagation. We do most of our coral propagation in situ, and that basically means we find an imperial coral, we bring it to this table at the beach, if you will. We clip the coral into small fragments. We place it into small plastic cups and pour a special concrete that sets in 30 seconds, putting the fragment of the coral into that concrete, placing it back underwater, taking it out to the reef balls where they have holes pre-built into them to accept the receptacles. We use a 2-part underwater epoxy putty and we glue the coral into the reef ball. Thereby, that coral that was taken out of the water is planted on the reef ball the same day. It's not exposed to any nursery risk. It's not exposed to any different diseases. While we have the coral out of the water, we treat it with chlorhexamine, which is the same thing you use before a surgery. It makes sure that the coral doesn't have any diseases and it's resistant to predators for 6 weeks because it makes it taste bad to predators. Gives it a good start. And by using small nubbins of coral, when they regrow, they'll naturally grow to the currents and the sun, just like when you plant a new tree. If you plant a seedling, it's going to grow proper to the light. Whereas if you transplant a very, very large tree, you have to orient it correctly and you have to have it, it may not be facing its limbs in the right direction. We have a second team that can plant large corals, but it's a much more advanced training skill. So we like our volunteers to use the small corals, and then we eventually train them up where they can work with larger and larger corals when it's necessary for rescue work. There's a lot of different uses of reef balls. Actually, we've documented over 100 different uses. We've used them as mitigation for damages to reefs. For example, when a ship goes aground, we can collect all the coral that's been damaged by that ship hull hitting the seafloor, put reef balls in rapidly, plant that coral onto the reef ball so they have a substrate off the bottom where that's been damaged by the barge or the ship, and restore that grounding right away. The same thing if you've got to dredge a channel for a new construction, you might be damaging habitat. We can create a new reef nearby, take any of the marine life out of that area before you dredge, and save and rescue that marine life. We can restore damaged reefs that have been damaged after storms or hurricanes, or tsunamis, even as we did in Thailand. We do oyster restoration work, both for harvest and for just creating oyster reef habitat for fisheries. We can also plant reef balls with oysters that are, for example, resistant to vibro, which is an oyster disease that's affecting the United States and is spreading worldwide. By planting reef balls with seed oysters that have that resistance, we plant them upstream of the main oyster beds so that the eggs and sperm from the planted reef balls can reseed the existing reefs with the vibro-resistant oysters, hereby rescuing large volumes of oyster reefs. We also use reef balls quite a bit for enhancing ecotourism and promoting tourism, for creating fishing sites, diving sites, snorkeling sites, surfing reefs. Many times we will have hotels that are having beach erosion. We'll put a reef right offshore their beach, which mitigates and stops their erosion, helps them build their beach back up naturally, at the same time providing their guests a place to plant corals, to snorkel, to dive, and to enjoy the beach. That's a big part of our business is shoreline stabilization. We don't stabilize just beaches, but also there can be erosion around mangrove islands or cliffs. We can put reef balls in front of them, just like a fringing reef protects the shoreline from waves, so can reef balls. We also use them quite a bit for education and awareness. If we teach a child how to make a reef ball and put it in the water, it's amazing to watch the child go back to the parent and say, hey, don't throw that plastic bag in the water because my reef is down there and that plastic bag might end up on my reef. So we try to get people engaged. If you know what's underwater, you appreciate it more. think this is more of the same. Here's an example of a mangrove project we did in the Cayman Islands. On the upper right-hand side, we plant seedlings in a nursery area. We grow them up to appropriate sizes. We take those reef balls and put them out into particularly high energy areas. We like to plant our mangroves where they put their roots out into the water, creating more habitat. On the upper left-hand side, you'll see an oyster reef project. That's at MacDill Air Force Base. That's a multi-purpose reef. It's designed to, the oysters help water quality in Tampa Bay. They're extremely good filter feeders, each oyster filtering about 20 gallons of water a day to pure clarity. It's also serving as a breakwater to protect the beach, but it's also in very, very low water, so that if MacDill Air Force Base is attacked by boats, that the props will be hit and stopped in an area where the marine defenses can protect the installation. On the lower right-hand side, you see one of the largest breakwaters that we've done, almost a mile long in Antigua at Maiden Island. This was composed of over 3,000 reef balls built in a period of 3 months. It was fully planted with corals. It's now the largest artificial reef in the world, designed artificial reef in the world, and it's used to protect the beach and is now owned by the country and used primarily for snorkeling and diving purposes. This is an example of a reef ball after 12 years. This was placed in Indonesia. This gives you an idea of, you really can barely, if you look in the center, you'll see the lip of where the center bladder is, but you see how the corals begin to grow. You no longer see it, that it's a reef ball reef. That will continue to grow for thousands of years, and you will have a restored reef. This was in an area where the reef had been lost from dynamite fishing. The dynamite fishing blew out the structure below it, so new corals could not attach. That's why there's sand and rubble all around this reef ball. But by placing the hard structure, the corals could naturally recruit and grow. Those were grown without being planted. And with that, that's the end of my presentation, and be happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Dot, for this presentation and explaining us what Reef Ball Foundation is doing and also about these reef balls. So we have some questions from the audience. The first one from Prodip. Does reef ball work only in ocean, the sea?
We actually do reef balls in freshwater as well. We have a partnership with No Shoes Reef and Kenny Chesney, which is an American country singer. And he likes to put a lot of reef balls in reefs because a lot of his country fans are fishermen, and they used to put Christmas trees down, but the Christmas trees would degrade and float up and hit the boats. So reef balls were not primarily designed for freshwater, but they're used extensively in freshwater. We also use them in a lot of reserves, regulated reserves, where they have to lower the water and raise it back up. When the water's down, they place the reef balls without having to use a floating system. When they raise the water back up, it creates a reef there. They're also used extensively in estuaries, which is a combination of fresh and salt water. We do a lot of that in Florida, and a lot of that around mangroves as well. So reef balls work in all aquatic systems, although their best use is marine ecosystems because they're designed for that. They're very heavy. When we do them from freshwater, we often inflate the center bladders more, use less concrete because obviously they're not affected by hurricanes there. So you can modify them just like you can modify any design. Recall when I said we're selling designed artificial reefs, not artificial reefs. Design means that we change that design to meet that individual project's needs. So when we go to any new project or any new place, we say, what do you really want? What are you trying to accomplish? And then we can design the system, the module that's going to best mimic that local reef system. So yes, we can use them in other locations.
Great. Also another question from Konstantinos. How long does it take approximately for corals or the other organisms to habitat the reef balls?
Typically, when we're putting the reef balls on the bottom, as soon as we take the bladder out, fish will move in right away. The first week, you'll start to see brown algae and green algae begin to grow. It takes about a year to see your first natural recruited coral. That's one that's free swimming that lands on its own because corals only spawn once a year. And it can take up to 20 years for that to grow into a nice coral reef. However, if we plant the coral, we can get that same coral reef in about 4 years. In some systems like temperate areas, it's a seasonal growth. It sets and regrows every year. So in 1 year, you get complete natural growth. Typically, a reef ball will not look like a reef ball anywhere between 6 months to 5 years. If it's really crystal clear water, it takes longer. If it's a high flow current, high turbid water like northern waters, it happens much faster. It's kind of counterintuitive. There's a lot more nutrients in cold water and fast moving dirty water than there is in crystal clear water. So that's why corals are much slower growing animals than, say, oysters, which grow very quickly, say 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Do you know if it can be used for plants like Posidonia oceanica, which are more common in the Mediterranean Sea?
Reef balls have been used in the Mediterranean Sea. Growth is much slower in the Mediterranean. It's a much more mature sea. There's not as many nutrients in it. It can take double the time for growth to occur in the Mediterranean as to most seas. Also the Dead Sea that has a high salinity content. Any seas that are on the margin just takes longer, just like the natural growth does. But in general, if there's a reef growing in the area, the reef balls will grow at the same rate as your natural reefs.
Mm-hmm. Also, could you tell us about the project which was the most challenging for you and where it was?
Well, we've had thousands of challenging projects. I think the Antigua project that I talked about, where we did the largest naturally planted coral reef in a 3-month period of time, pulled most of my hair out. I was given a call by a man named Alan Stanford who said, I would like to have a mile-long reef built on my property. How much could you do it for? And I said, well, we could probably do that for about $300,000. He said, well, how long would that take? I said, oh, about 3 to 4 years to do it efficiently, because we just send down a couple of molds and we'd build them over time. He said, son, I didn't ask how much it would cost. I want it done in 3 months. I said, well, that would be like $3 million. He said, done, I'll send you a check tomorrow. So we had to mobilize the whole company, people from all of our different organizations. We have 27 offices around the world with different contractors. We had to have people from all over the world come together in a mass on short notice, throw that all together and use all of our technologies, because it was a very challenging site. It had both sand and rock and different depths and all types of different colors. They were doing dredging. We had to rescue large corals. So I would say that was a very, very challenging project and very successful, I might add.
Wow, that's great to hear. And what would happen, this is a more general question, if to the ecosystem if there are no coral reefs in the ocean?
Coral reefs are very, very, very important for humanity. They're the basis of the food chain of the ocean. So you would lose an enormous amount of species diversity. That may not mean much to a lot of people, but species diversity is where we find things like cures to coral, or cancer, cures to diseases. All kind of marine life is based there. And whenever you take one animal out of the chain, the whole chain reacts. My suspicion is most of the oceans would collapse and rebuild themselves in a totally different manner than they're built now. We look probably a lot more like the temperate systems you see in colder waters. We wouldn't lose everything, but it would be like almost the same if you just cut down all the trees in your country. Imagine what would be left. There would still be some land left. You still might have some cows, but you'd lose all the birds. You'd lose everything that lives in those trees. You'd lose all the shade. All the animals and all the plants that have to have that shade would die. The same type of catastrophic events would occur. So it's very important that we restore our coral reefs. And to tell you how important that is, half the species diversity in the world is based on coral reefs, the other half being primarily tropical rainforests. So if you took out half of our species diversity, you're losing half of the life on the planet, most likely, and probably impacts in other ways. Now, the tropical forests take up very, very, very large amounts of land. Almost all of Brazil, for example, is a tropical forest, but every single reef in the whole entire world would fit in the state of South Carolina, which is a very small state. So we don't have that many reefs to lose. That's why, putting 1 million reef balls down literally restored 0.5%. That's, 200 million reef balls is all the reef we have in the world. So they are very, very critical, and every coral counts. It takes maybe 100 years to regrow a tree. It takes 500 years to regrow a coral to its full size. So it takes a lot longer to restore as well. So if you cut down all the trees, you can always replant them, and then maybe your kids' kids will get a forest again. if you cut down all the corals, it's going to be 10 generations down before your descendants are able to dive and enjoy the same resources that we've enjoyed.
Sure. Thank you very much also for all these answers. So I don't know if we have some more questions for Todd. If yes, please do not hesitate and write to the Q&A box. And actually, we are also getting to the end of webinar. So if you have some additional questions for our other speakers, please write it to the Q&A box now and we can ask them something. So thank you again, Todd, for a great presentation.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yes, thank you again.
All right.
So now, as I mentioned, we have this space for some questions. I would like to ask something to Noah, who actually didn't have any space for questions after his presentation. So I believe, Noah, you are still with us. And just let me know if you are here. Noah Sitati, are you here? Also, Thomas, I don't know if you are still with us or not.
I am.
Hello, Thomas is here.
Yes.
Noah didn't have space for questions, so I would like to ask him something. But also, Thomas, you had some questions. I saw that you answered them actually in the written form, but perhaps you could also explain us. There was an interesting question about this hybrid airborne energy and this also combination with the solar panels. So perhaps you could explain this as well.
Yeah, there was one question if we could add solar panels on the kites. Unfortunately, the kite itself will be a small surface area pointing in different directions, so not suitable for solar directly, but the hybrid business case would of course be relevant, where you can add airborne wind systems in together with conventional wind farms to sort of better utilize the grid interface and to have a less intermittent source from that location. Later on, maybe it could be the other way around, that you equip the airborne wind farms with solar panels underground to support the airborne wind production. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I don't know also, Hassan, if you are here with us, but there is also another question for you. So if yes, just turn on your video, and we can ask you this question. And also, if you have some other questions, please, this is the space for the discussion. Okay, I can see that also Hassan and Noah are offline. So I would like to thank to all our speakers, firstly, and also to all our participants here on Zoom and on YouTube and Facebook as well. I hope it was interesting for you, and I hope that also you will follow us on our social media and you will attend the future webinars. So please, you can see the links in the chat, so you can follow us and stay tuned. We will have also other future environmental webinars, but also webinars on other topics. So thank you again for your time, and I wish you a great rest of the day. Thank you. Bye-bye.